This story is fictional. Any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental. Part 1. Right in the middle of a packed church baptism, they treated me like I was the problem, like I'd shown up to ruin something sacred. Then my Aunt Lucia, who'd once been pushed so far to the edge of this family she practically disappeared, walked in holding a partner contract under my company's name. That was the moment everything cracked. But to understand how we got there, you need to know what it feels like to grow up invisible. I'm Carter Martin. I'm an architect. I design spaces for a living, rooms with light that falls exactly where it should, staircases that hold weight without complaint, foundations that don't crack under pressure. I've always known how to make structures stand. I just didn't know how to make my own family see me. Aria Davis married my dad when I was 12. She came into our lives with soft perfume, a bright smile, and her son, Samuel Lopez. Samuel was 2 years younger than me, with dimples, and the kind of easy charm that made teachers lean forward when he spoke. From day one, it was clear he was special. Samuel has such presence, Aria would say at dinner, brushing imaginary crumbs off his sleeve. Sam's got vision, my dad would add, nodding like he was discussing a Fortune 500 CEO instead of a seventh grader who forgot to take out the trash. I was the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who didn't need much. That's what they told themselves anyway. By high school, I was drafting house plans on a hand-me-down laptop. By college, I was pulling all-nighters in the architecture studio, while Samuel posted filtered photos from business networking mixers Aria somehow got him into. When I graduated and got licensed, my dad shook my hand like I just finished a decent hobby. When Samuel announced he wanted to modernize the small family construction business my grandfather had built from scratch, there was cake. There was a speech. When I suggested expanding into sustainable residential design, something I had actual credentials in, Aria smiled tightly. That's cute, Carter. But Samuel's thinking bigger. Cute, that word has a way of shrinking you. Still, I stayed. I designed layouts. I ran structural calculations. I stamped drawings with my license. I told myself it didn't matter who got the applause as long as the building stood. Then came the Riverside project, the biggest contract the company had ever landed. Mixed-use development, eco-forward design, the kind of thing I'd dreamed about since grad school. I worked on it for 8 months. Every rendering, every site plan, every permit submission. The night before the final contract signing, Samuel called. "Hey, bro," he said, casual. Too casual. Small tweak. The investor prefers a single project lead listed. Cleaner look. We'll keep it simple. What do you mean, single lead? I asked, though I already knew. Just my name on the contract. You're still part of the team, obviously. Obviously. The contract went through. My name didn't. I found out 3 days later when I opened the finalized PDF and scrolled and scrolled and scrolled. Nothing. It was like I'd never existed. When I confronted Aria, she folded her hands like she was leading a PTA meeting. Carter, you have to understand optics. Samuel is the face of the company. You're more behind the scenes. Behind the scenes. Invisible again. I should have walked away then. Instead, I stayed quiet. I gathered emails. I saved drafts. I downloaded system logs from the shared design server. Every upload had a timestamp. Every revision had my user ID. I didn't say anything. Not yet. And then came the baptism. The Sunday morning service packed with extended family, investors, and half the town because Samuel had sponsored the new children's wing at the church with his Riverside bonus. I wasn't planning to go. But something in me needed to see how far they'd take it. I slipped into a pew near the back as the choir sang. Sunlight poured through stained glass, painting the aisle in reds and golds. Samuel stood near the front in a tailored suit, shaking hands like a politician. Aria floated beside him, radiant. When she spotted me, her smile faltered. She leaned toward my dad and whispered. A few minutes later, my dad approached me, jaw tight. "Carter," he said quietly, "this isn't the time. Let's not make this about you." I blinked. "I'm just sitting here." "People are talking," he insisted. "There are rumors about contracts, about you being unhappy." Like that was the issue. Before I could respond, the pastor tapped the microphone and thanked Samuel Lopez for his visionary leadership and generosity. Applause erupted. And then Aria did something I still replay in slow motion. She stepped up to the mic and said, "We're so proud of Samuel for carrying on the family legacy. Some people don't understand sacrifice, but Samuel has always put this family first. Some people. The entire church turned, subtle but unmistakable, toward the back pew where I sat. Heat crawled up my neck. That's when the doors at the rear of the sanctuary opened. Aunt Lucia stood there. She hadn't been to a family event in years. Not since Aria called her dramatic, and my dad stopped returning her calls. She wore a simple navy dress, her silver hair pinned back, her expression steady, and in her hands was a thick envelope. She walked down the aisle slowly, heels clicking against tile. The choir fell quiet. The pastor looked confused. She didn't look at Samuel, she looked at me. Then she lifted the envelope slightly and said, loud enough for the first few rows to hear, "I believe this belongs to Carter Martin." And just like that, the air shifted. Samuel's smile froze. Aria went pale. Because printed clearly on the top page, visible even from where I sat, were the words Partner Agreement, Martin Design Group, LLC. My company. The one they didn't know existed. And I realized, as every eye in that church turned from Samuel to me, that this wasn't just about humiliation anymore, this was about receipts. And Aunt Lucia was just getting started. Part 2. The sound in that church changed. It wasn't loud at first, just a ripple, a shift in posture. The kind of silence that isn't quiet, it's loaded. Aunt Lucia didn't rush. She kept walking, steady and unbothered, like she had all the time in the world. The envelope in her hands wasn't flimsy. It was thick cream stock, the kind lawyers use when something matters. I could see a notary seal glinting under the stained glass light. Samuel's jaw tightened. Aria's hand flew instinctively to his arm, as if she could physically anchor him in place. My dad looked confused, then wary. I stood up before she reached my pew. My legs felt like they were moving through water. "Lucia," my dad said sharply, stepping into the aisle. "This isn't the place." She didn't break eye contact with me. "Actually, Daniel," she replied calmly, "it's exactly the place." That line hit harder than she probably intended, because this was the place, wasn't it? The same church basement where I was once asked to give up my spot in a youth presentation so Samuel could have more exposure. The same pulpit where Aria praised Samuel's entrepreneurial spirit and forgot to mention I'd passed my licensing exam that same week. This place had always been their stage. Lucia stopped in front of me and held out the envelope. "Your grandfather told me," she said softly, but the microphone on the pulpit picked up just enough to carry her words. "When the time was right." A murmur moved through the pews. My grandfather, he'd been gone 5 years, the only person in the family who ever asked to see my blueprints, the only one who called me architect, like it meant something. I swallowed. "What is this?" She pressed the envelope into my hands. "Insurance." My heart pounded. Behind us, Samuel found his voice. "Can we not do this right now?" he snapped, stepping closer. "This is my goddaughter's baptism." Lucia turned, finally looking at him. "Funny," she said evenly. "You didn't mind doing business in secret." That landed. Aria stepped forward, smile tight but voice sweet. "Lucia, I'm sure whatever misunderstanding you think you have, we can discuss privately." "Oh, I have no misunderstandings," Lucia replied. I opened the envelope. Inside was a formal partner contract naming Martin Design Group, LLC as a co-equal development partner on the Riverside project. Signed, dated, notarized. My breath caught. The signature at the bottom wasn't Samuel's, it was the investor's, and attached behind it, an addendum, an original design authorship acknowledgement, with my name listed as lead architect, dated 2 weeks before the final family company contract removed me. My pulse roared in my ears. Samuel went pale. "That's not valid," he said quickly. The final agreement replaced any preliminary drafts. Lucia tilted her head, except this one was executed and filed. Filed, as in legally registered, as in not a draft. Closer, there it was, a filing receipt number. I knew that number format because I had registered my company quietly 3 years ago. They didn't know that part. While Samuel was busy becoming the face, I had been building something else. Nights, weekends, quietly designing under my own LLC. Small residential projects at first, then larger sustainability consultations. Nothing flashy, just solid, legitimate, documented. My hidden life. Samuel laughed, but it sounded brittle. "Carter doesn't even have the capital to partner on something like Riverside." Lucia's eyes flicked back to me. "Check page 4, she said. I flipped. There it was, a capital contribution line item, fully funded, from an account I recognized immediately. The trust my grandfather had set up for me when I graduated, the one I'd never touched, until Riverside. Because when I realized they were cutting me out, I went directly to the investor myself, presented my full design portfolio, my license, my sustainability projections. He'd listened, he'd signed. I hadn't said a word to my family. Not yet. Gasps rippled through the first few rows as a few of the business-minded cousins leaned over to read. Samuel stepped closer to me, lowering his voice. "You went behind my back?" I met his eyes for the first time without shrinking. "You removed my name." Arya's composure cracked. "Carter, sweetheart, this is messy. You're embarrassing the family." Embarrassing. There it was again. Only this time, I didn't feel small. I felt steady. Lucia reached into her purse. "And that's not all," she said. She pulled out something thinner, yellowed, folded. My stomach dropped. I knew that paper. I'd seen my grandfather write on stationery like that 1,000 times. Lucia held it carefully. "He told me," she said clearly now, her voice carrying across the silent church, "if they ever tried to erase you, this was to be read publicly." Arya inhaled sharply. My dad whispered, "Lucia, don't." She looked at him with something like pity. "It's time." And as she unfolded the handwritten letter in front of the entire congregation, I realized this wasn't just about a contract anymore. This was about a promise made long before any of us stood in this church. And whatever was written on that page was about to change everything. Part 3. The paper trembled slightly in Aunt Lucia's hands, not because she was nervous, but because it was old. I recognized my grandfather's handwriting immediately. Strong, slightly slanted letters. Blue ink, the kind he insisted on using even when everyone else switched to typing everything. The church was so quiet I could hear the hum of the overhead lights. Lucia cleared her throat. "This letter," she began, "was written by my brother, Henry Martin, 6 months before he passed. He gave it to me with instructions." Arya's voice sliced through the stillness. "This is inappropriate." Lucia didn't look at her. "It says," she continued, "that if Carter Martin is ever pushed aside, erased, or denied his rightful work in this family business, I am to read this aloud in the presence of witnesses." Every head turned. Samuel shifted his weight, jaw tight. My dad looked like he'd aged 5 years in 5 minutes. Lucia began reading. Open quote. "To my family, if you are hearing this, it means something has gone wrong. Carter has always been the builder among us, not the loudest, not the most charming, but the one who studies the ground before laying foundation. That kind of man is rare. I have seen his plans. I have seen his discipline. The future of this business, if it is to last, will stand on his shoulders. I have also seen how easy it is in families to favor shine over structure. Do not mistake quiet for weakness. If Carter is ever denied credit for his work, know that I have made arrangements to ensure the truth can be proven. Justice requires documentation." Close quote. A collective breath moved through the pews. Documentation. Lucia lowered the page slightly and looked up. "There are attachments," she said. Samuel's composure cracked for the first time. "This is absurd. Grandpa never said anything like that to me." Lucia met his eyes calmly. "He didn't have to." She handed me the rest of the contents from the envelope. There was a USB drive taped to the back of the letter and a folded sheet labeled Server Archive Access, Timestamp Log. My pulse quickened. 3 years ago, when my grandfather's health started failing, he had insisted on digitizing old company files. I'd helped him. I'd set up backups. I'd organized everything into clean folders. What no one knew was that he'd also insisted on keeping mirrored server logs, independent from the family's main system. Lucia spoke again. Henry had Carter show him how to track user activity on the company design server. He didn't trust memory. He trusted timestamps. Samuel laughed under his breath. "You're seriously trying to say..." Lucia cut him off. "The night before the Riverside contract was finalized, someone accessed Carter's design files at 11:42 p.m. The metadata shows a mass export." My heart slammed. I remembered that night. I'd gone to bed around 10, exhausted. Lucia's voice stayed steady. At 12:03 a.m., a revised contract draft was created under Samuel's user login. A murmur rippled louder now. Samuel's face drained of color. "That's manipulated," he snapped. "Anyone could fake a log." Lucia didn't flinch. The mirrored archive was backed up off-site with a third-party IT firm, time-stamped, digitally certified. There it was, twist number 3, the tiny detail. the log, because you can argue opinions, you can spin narratives, but timestamps, they don't care about feelings. I looked down at the printout in my hands. There was Samuel's username, the export command, the exact file names, my original schematics, my sustainability projections, my structural load analyses, and then the contract revision file, all within 21 minutes. Arya's voice went sharp. "Carter, say something. Tell them this is a misunderstanding." For years I would have smoothed it over, made it smaller, protected the image. But something inside me had shifted. I stepped toward the front. The pastor, wide-eyed and silent, instinctively handed me the microphone. It felt heavier than I expected. "I didn't come here to cause a scene," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "I came because this is my family, and I thought maybe, just maybe, I still belonged in it." The words hung in the air. I designed Riverside, every plan, every permit. When my name was removed, I didn't fight publicly. I gathered records. I held up the timestamp sheet. I didn't want revenge. I wanted acknowledgement. Samuel shook his head. "You're blowing this out of proportion." I looked at him. "For 8 months of work?" Silence. I turned to my dad. "You told me not to make this about me, but it already was." His eyes were glossy now, conflicted, cornered. Arya stepped closer to Samuel, protective. Lucia moved beside me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel alone in that family. The pastor cleared his throat awkwardly. Perhaps this conversation should continue after the service. But the service was already over. Not the baptism, the illusion. Because in the third pew, one of the investors, Mr. Callahan, slowly stood up. He had been silent the entire time, until now. And when he spoke, his voice carried across the sanctuary like a verdict. "I think," he said calmly, "we need to discuss which Martin we're actually in business with." And suddenly, this wasn't just a family issue anymore. It was a legal one. Part 4. You could feel the power shift, not emotionally, not dramatically, structurally. Like when you realize the load-bearing wall isn't where you thought it was. Mr. Callahan stepped into the aisle, adjusting his cufflinks. He wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. The man had funded half the new developments on the east side of town. When he spoke, people recalculated. "I signed an agreement," he said evenly, "with Martin Design Group LLC. My understanding was that it represented the architectural lead behind Riverside." Every word precise. Samuel straightened his shoulders. "And it does. Our family company." Callahan held up a hand. "The documents I reviewed listed Carter Martin as principal architect and equity partner." A collective inhale. Samuel's mouth opened, closed. Arya stepped in smoothly. There must have been confusion in early drafts. We streamlined the structure before final execution. I almost admired her composure. Almost. Callahan turned to me. "Mr. Martin, are you telling me your name was removed after our meeting?" "Yes," I said. One word. Solid. He nodded once. Then he looked toward Samuel. "Did you submit a revised contract without disclosing a co-signed partnership?" Samuel's voice wavered just slightly. "It was a branding decision. Internal restructuring. Without disclosure?" The word disclosure hung heavy. Arya's voice sharpened. "This is a family matter." Callahan didn't blink. It became a business matter the moment signatures were involved. There it was. Receipts don't argue. They present. The pastor quietly asked the congregation to take a short recess. No one moved. Phones were already out, subtle but visible. I knew what that meant. This wouldn't stay inside these walls. Lucia leaned toward me. "You don't have to say everything today." But I felt something rising in my chest. Not anger, clarity. "For the record," I said, projecting my voice without the mic now, "I never intended to embarrass anyone. I went directly to Mr. Callahan after realizing my name was being removed. I presented my independent company because I needed to protect my license." That part landed with the contractors in the room. Your license is your livelihood. "I funded my portion through a trust established by my grandfather," I continued. "I have documentation for every design file, every submission, every timestamp." Samuel scoffed. "You're acting like this was some grand conspiracy." I looked at him. "At 11:42 p.m., you exported my full design folder." His face flickered. "At 12:03 a.m., you generated a revised contract draft." Arya grabbed his arm. "Stop engaging." But it was too late, because in the third row, my cousin Elena, who worked in corporate compliance in Chicago, spoke up. "Metadata doesn't lie," she said quietly, "especially mirrored archives." Samuel looked around, realizing the room was no longer leaning his direction. For years, he'd controlled the narrative. Today, the narrative had timestamps. My dad finally stepped forward. "Carter, why didn't you come to me?" There it was, the question that always came too late. "I did," I said softly, "for years." His face crumpled slightly. Arya's composure snapped. "This is unbelievable, after everything this family has done for you." "For me," I echoed. She faltered. Lucia's voice cut in, calm and devastating. "What exactly has the family done for him, Arya?" Silence. And that's when the second realization hit Samuel. Not just that the log existed, not just that the partnership was filed, but that I hadn't come empty-handed. Because tucked inside my suit jacket was something else. Not a contract, not a letter, an itemized ledger, every hour logged on Riverside, every unpaid design fee, every expense absorbed personally when the family company claimed budget constraints. I hadn't shown it yet, I wasn't sure if I would, but I felt its weight against my ribs like quiet armor. Callahan cleared his throat. "I suggest we pause all Riverside transactions until this is clarified. Legally." Samuel's head snapped up. "You can't just..." "I can," Callahan said calmly, "and I will." That was the first real crack in Samuel's golden image. Funding paused, investors uncertain, and questions forming. Arya looked at me with something that wasn't anger anymore, it was calculation. "You're really willing to burn this all down?" she asked quietly. I met her gaze. I didn't light the match. Outside, I could hear people whispering near the church steps, phones buzzing, news spreading faster than any sermon. Lucia touched my arm gently. "This is only the beginning," she murmured. She was right, because while the church was still reeling from contracts and timestamps, there was one detail no one else in that room knew yet. Not Samuel. Not Arya. Not even my dad. A clause buried in the partnership agreement. One that would activate automatically if misrepresentation was proven. And if that clause triggered, control of Riverside wouldn't just pause. It would transfer. And I wasn't sure they were ready for that conversation. Part 5. The church emptied in fragments. Not all at once, not dramatically. Clusters formed in the parking lot like aftershocks. Investors near the front steps, cousins whispering near the hydrangeas, church elders pretending not to stare. Samuel disappeared into a side hallway with Arya and my dad. No doubt strategizing, rewriting, reframing. I stayed where I was for a moment, standing near the pew where I'd spent most of my life feeling smaller than I actually was. Lucia didn't rush me. "You okay?" she asked quietly. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "I don't know yet." She gave a small nod, like that was the only honest answer. When we stepped outside, the sun was too bright. It always is after something breaks open, like the world refuses to dim just because your family imploded. Mr. Callahan approached me near the stone steps. "Walk with me," he said. We moved a few yards away from the crowd. His tone wasn't unkind, but it was direct. "Why didn't you tell me about the internal conflict?" he asked. "Because I thought it would resolve," I said. I didn't want to jeopardize the project. He studied me for a long second. "You understand the clause, correct?" I nodded. Clause 14b. If a managing partner is found to have materially misrepresented authorship or equity during contract execution, controlling authority defaults to the verified originating entity. Martin Design Group LLC, mine. "I do," I said carefully, "and you're prepared for what that means?" I glanced toward the church doors where Samuel had just reemerged, jaw tight, scanning the parking lot like a man looking for a narrative to reclaim. "Yes," I said. The truth was, I'd prepared for this moment long before today. Twist number 1 wasn't just the LLC, it was everything behind it. 3 years ago, after the first time Samuel dismissed one of my proposals in front of investors, laughing it off as overly academic, I stopped waiting for validation. I built something else. Quietly. I finished my LEED accreditation. I completed a sustainable urban systems certification through an online program at MIT. Nights after work, no one knowing why I was always busy. I cultivated independent clients under non-disclosure agreements. And when the Riverside opportunity appeared, I saw something Samuel didn't. The investor wanted sustainability credibility, not just charm. That's why Callahan listened when I approached him alone. That's why he signed the partnership draft before Samuel even realized I'd met with him. It wasn't sabotage, it was survival. Back near the steps, Arya was speaking sharply to someone on her phone, probably legal counsel. My dad stood off to the side, staring at the pavement. Samuel finally approached us. His expression was different now, less outrage, more strategy. "Can we talk privately?" he asked. Lucia didn't move. Samuel exhaled. "Alone," I considered it, then shook my head. "No." His nostrils flared slightly. He wasn't used to being denied. "This doesn't have to get uglier," he said under his breath. "We can amend the contract, add your name back in, make this go away." Add my name back in, like it had fallen off by accident. "It already got ugly," I replied. His voice hardened. "You're risking everything. Investors don't like instability. They like transparency less?" I countered. He didn't answer. Arya stepped in smoothly, tone syrupy again. "Carter, sweetheart, think long term. This family built something together. You don't want to fracture it permanently." Together. I thought about every late-night drafting while Samuel networked, every time Arya redirected praise, every meeting where I was introduced as technical support. "I don't want to fracture anything," I said calmly, "but I'm not willing to disappear either." Lucia squeezed my arm once, subtle but grounding. Samuel looked between us and lowered his voice further. "What do you want?" There it was. Not an apology, a negotiation. I didn't answer immediately, because I knew what I wanted wasn't small, it wasn't petty, it wasn't loud, it was precise. "I'll let you know," I said. His eyes narrowed. "Soon." "Oh," I replied evenly. "Very soon." Because what Samuel didn't know yet, what Arya definitely didn't know, was that before coming to the church that morning, I had already emailed a forensic audit request to the third-party IT firm that maintained the mirrored server logs, and they had replied with something I hadn't expected. Something time-stamped not just 11:42 p.m., but earlier that same evening, a failed login attempt from a device registered to Arya Davis. And if that detail held, the story about who orchestrated the removal of my name was about to shift again, in a way even Samuel wouldn't see coming. Part 6, by Monday morning, Riverside was frozen. Not publicly, not yet, but legally. Everything had slowed to a crawl. Callahan's office issued a temporary procedural hold pending internal verification. That was investor language for, "We don't trust what we were told." I sat in my own office, my real one, not the glass-walled corner space at the family firm that always felt like a borrowed seat, and watched the city wake up through floor-to-ceiling windows I'd leased 6 months ago. Martin Design Group. LLC, the name still felt new on the brushed steel plaque outside my door. No one in my family had ever seen it. 2 junior architects worked quietly in the adjacent studio. They knew nothing about the church, nothing about Samuel. They only knew that our biggest project was suddenly under scrutiny. I checked my email. There it was, the full forensic log report. I opened it slowly. 11:17 p.m., failed login attempt. User, a Davis admin, device ID, registered iPad, Arya Davis. 4:02 p.m., successful login. User, Slopa's exec file export sequence. 12 a.m., contract revision generated. My jaw tightened. Samuel may have executed the export, but Arya tried first. That tiny detail 17 minutes earlier changed everything. It wasn't just favoritism, it was coordination. My phone buzzed. "Dad." I stared at it for 3 rings before answering. "Carter," he began, voice tired. "We need to talk. We are talking. Not like this. Not through lawyers and investors." There it was. The discomfort with documentation. "I have the forensic logs," I said quietly. Silence. "What logs?" There was a failed login before Samuel accessed my files. Another pause. "Whose?" I didn't soften it. "Arya's." His exhale was audible. "That doesn't mean... It means someone was trying to access my files before the contract was rewritten." His voice shifted from defensive to strained. "Carter, families make mistakes. This wasn't a mistake." He didn't argue that. "We can fix this," he said instead. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. Fix what exactly? The contract? The funding? Or the years? He had no answer for that either. Later that afternoon, Samuel showed up at my office unannounced. He walked in like he still owned the place, eyes scanning the clean lines, the scaled models on the shelves, the framed LEED certification on the wall. "You've been busy," he muttered. "I have." He turned to face me. "You went to Callahan behind my back. You removed my name behind mine." His jaw tightened. "That's business." "No," I said evenly. "That was theft." The word hung between us. His eyes flickered. Anger first. Then something else. Unease. "Look," he said, lowering his voice. "Mom panicked." There it was. Confirmation without confession. She thought you were going to walk away and tank the deal. She said if we kept it clean, single lead, it would be simpler. Simpler for who? For optics, he snapped. I stood slowly. Samuel, there's a failed login from her device before you exported the files. He went still. For a full 3 seconds, he didn't breathe. That's not, he started, then stopped. It's time-stamped, I continued. Mirrored. Third-party certified. He ran a hand through his hair. You don't understand the pressure, he said quietly. She's been pushing for years to secure something big, something that proves the company can compete. And I was competition, I replied. He didn't deny it. Silence stretched. Then, for the first time in my life, Samuel looked smaller, not exposed, cornered. What do you want? He asked again, but this time there was no arrogance. Just calculation. I had rehearsed this conversation in my head for years. In different versions, I'd yelled. In others, I'd walked away silently. But the version standing in front of him now was different. I want the truth, I said calmly. You have logs. I want it publicly acknowledged. His eyes snapped up. Absolutely not. In the same church where you implied I was ungrateful. He scoffed. You're serious? Yes. He stared at me like I'd asked for something outrageous. But I wasn't asking for revenge. I was asking for correction. And in writing, I continued, to the entire extended family and investors. That would destroy Mom. I held his gaze. She tried to destroy my career. He flinched at that. And third, I said, pulling the ledger from my desk drawer and sliding it across the table, you repay what the company withheld from my design fees. Itemized, with interest. He stared at the printed pages. Every hour. Every invoice marked deferred. Every expense reimbursed to others, but not to me. Justice through receipts. You've been keeping score, he muttered. No, I replied quietly. I've been keeping records. He looked up at me slowly, and if we don't agree, I didn't hesitate. Clause 14b activates. His face went pale, because he knew what that meant now. Riverside wouldn't just pause, it would transfer, control, funding authority, public recognition, all of it. And for the first time in our lives, Samuel Lopez wasn't holding the leverage. I was. But neither of us knew yet how far Aria was willing to go to keep it from slipping away. Part 7. Samuel didn't answer right away. He just stared at the ledger like it had personally offended him. I need to talk to Mom, he said finally. That's fine, I replied. But don't take too long. He stood there a moment longer like he was waiting for me to blink first. I didn't. When he left my office, the door closed softer than I expected. Not slammed. Not dramatic. Just controlled. Samuel had always been good at presentation, but presentation cracks under pressure. By Tuesday afternoon, the situation wasn't just internal anymore. Someone from the church had posted about a heated contract dispute during baptism service on a local community page. No names, but small towns don't need names. People connect dots faster than headlines. Callahan's legal team requested a formal meeting for Thursday morning. Neutral ground. Conference room. All principals present, which meant me, Samuel, Aria, my dad, and 2 attorneys. The night before the meeting, I didn't sleep much. I kept replaying my grandfather's letter in my head. Do not mistake quiet for weakness. I thought about the years I swallowed things. The jokes about being the technical one. The meetings where Samuel spoke over me and I let it slide because family. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. Thursday came gray and cold. The conference room overlooked the river that Riverside was supposed to redefine. Glass walls, long polished table, neutral art. Callahan sat at the head. His attorney to the right, Samuel and Aria entered together, coordinated, controlled. My dad followed a step behind, looking like he hadn't slept either. Aria wore navy, conservative, respectable. She smiled at me as if we were at brunch. Carter, she said softly, I hope we can resolve this peacefully. I nodded once. That depends. We all sat. Callahan began without pleasantries. We have 2 executed documents, he said. One listing Samuel Lopez as sole lead under the family company. One listing Martin Design Group LLC as equity partner and architectural authority. We also have forensic logs indicating potential misrepresentation during file transfer. He folded his hands. I'm not interested in family disputes. I'm interested in liability. Straight to the point. Aria leaned forward. There was no misrepresentation. There was internal restructuring that wasn't properly communicated. Her tone was polished, measured. Callahan's attorney slid a printed page across the table. The mirrored server log shows a failed login from your registered device at 11:17 p.m. before Mr. Lopez's successful login at 11:42. Aria's smile didn't fully falter, but it tightened. I often check files remotely, she said. That proves nothing. It proves access attempt, the attorney replied evenly. Samuel shifted in his seat. I exported the files. I'll take responsibility for that. Aria shot him a look, but it was too late. Callahan tapped the table lightly. Responsibility for what, exactly? Samuel hesitated. There it was, the pause that collapses narratives. For consolidating authorship under one name, he said carefully. And was Mr. Martin informed? Silence. My dad closed his eyes briefly. Samuel didn't answer, because there was no version of that answer that saved him. Callahan leaned back. Clause 14b is clear. If misrepresentation occurred, controlling authority transfers to the verified originating entity. He looked at me. Mr. Martin, are you prepared to assume control? Every eye turned. This was the first major turning point. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately, to take everything and walk. But control wasn't the point. Correction was. I am prepared, I said slowly, but I'm also prepared to resolve this without triggering the clause. Samuel's head snapped up. Aria's eyes narrowed slightly. Callahan gestured. On what terms? I slid a single sheet across the table. Not the full ledger, not yet. Just a summary. My conditions are simple, I said. First, a public acknowledgement and apology in the same church where my credibility was questioned. Aria's composure cracked. Absolutely not. I didn't look at her. Second, a written admission sent to all extended family members and investors clarifying authorship and equity. Samuel stared at the table. Third, repayment of withheld design fees and expenses as outlined in the attached itemized record. Callahan glanced at the document, then back at them. That seems measured, he said. Measured, not vengeful, not explosive, precise. Aria's voice turned sharp. You're extorting us. I met her gaze evenly. No, I'm offering you an alternative to losing Riverside entirely. The room went still, because everyone understood what that meant. If they refused, I would activate the clause, and Riverside would legally become mine to lead. Samuel finally spoke, but his voice had changed. Mom, he said quietly, not taking his eyes off the table, we can't lose the project. Aria looked at him, stunned. He looked tired. For the first time, the golden child looked human. Callahan stood. I'll give you 48 hours, he said. After that, I move according to contract. The meeting adjourned. As we gathered our things, Aria leaned close to me, her voice low enough that only I could hear. You think this makes you powerful? I held her gaze calmly. No, I said. It makes me documented. Her expression hardened. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that there was one more piece in that envelope Lucia brought to church. One I hadn't shown anyone, a handwritten addendum from my grandfather, with a date, and a clause about succession. And if that document was legally binding, this fight wasn't just about Riverside. It was about who was meant to lead the family legacy all along. Part 8. 48 hours is a strange amount of time. It's long enough to panic, short enough to make every minute feel expensive. I didn't go home Thursday night. I stayed at the office, lights low, the city reflecting off the river in fractured lines. My junior team left around 6, unaware that the biggest project of our careers was sitting in legal suspension. On my desk, the envelope from Lucia lay open again. I pulled out my grandfather's letter and read it a second time. Slower. Then I unfolded the smaller addendum tucked behind it, the one I hadn't shown at the church. The paper was thinner, the handwriting tighter, more deliberate. It read, open quote, in the event that leadership of the family construction business is contested due to misconduct or misrepresentation, I instruct that Carter Martin be given first right of succession contingent upon demonstrated licensure and independent capacity. Close quote. First right of succession, contingent upon licensure and independent capacity. He'd known. He must have seen the undercurrents long before I did. At the time he wrote that, I was still finishing my exams. I didn't even have my license yet, but he must have believed I would. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Independent capacity. That was the hidden life they never bothered to look for. The LLC, the certifications, the trust account, the client portfolio. They saw me as behind-the-scenes support because they never checked if I'd built my own stage. My phone buzzed. Lucia. You read it? She asked without greeting. Yes. A pause. He made me promise I wouldn't step in unless they erased you. They did. I know. There was no gloating in her voice, just quiet certainty. Are you going to use it? She asked. I looked at the addendum again. I don't know yet. Good, she replied. Good? Power used too quickly becomes ego. Power used precisely becomes justice. I smiled faintly. That sounded like something my grandfather would have said too. Friday morning, my dad showed up alone. No Arya. No Samuel. He stood in my office doorway like he wasn't sure he was allowed in. Come in, I said. He stepped inside slowly, taking in the space. You built this, he murmured. Yes, he nodded, almost to himself. I didn't realize how far you'd gone. That stung more than the contract ever did. He sat across from me. Arya is upset, he began carefully. I'm sure she is. She feels attacked. I didn't react, and Samuel feels cornered. I leaned forward slightly. They're not the only ones who felt that way. He rubbed his face with both hands. Carter, I won't defend what happened. I can't. The logs, the contract, it looks bad. It is bad. He met my eyes. But a public apology at church, a written admission to the entire family, that's nuclear. No, I said evenly. That's proportional. He didn't argue that word. You're asking them to dismantle Samuel's reputation. I held his gaze. They dismantled my credibility first. Silence filled the room. Then he said something I didn't expect. She tried to log in because she didn't trust you. The words landed heavy. Arya, I asked. He nodded. She thought you were going to take Riverside and cut us out. I let out a slow breath. So she tried to take it first. He didn't answer. Because that's exactly what happened. She pushed Samuel, he admitted quietly, told him you were positioning yourself as competition. I was positioning myself as an equal. He swallowed. I should have seen it, he said. That was the closest I'd ever heard him come to admitting fault. You still can, I replied. He looked up. 48 hours, I reminded him. That's what Callahan gave. He nodded slowly. As he stood to leave, he hesitated. Your grandfather did always say you were the foundation, he said quietly. After he left, I stared at the addendum again. First, right of succession. If I invoked it, this wouldn't just be about Riverside. It would be about leadership of the entire family company, and that would detonate everything. Late that afternoon, Samuel called. We'll agree to repayment, he said without greeting, and we'll correct the investor documents. And the apology? I asked. Silence. That's humiliating. So was Sunday. He exhaled sharply. You're enjoying this? No, I said honestly. I'm exhausted. Another pause. If we do this, he said carefully, it's controlled, no dramatics, no letters from the dead. That last line told me something important. The letter had shaken him more than the logs. Sunday, I said, after service. And the written admission? Sent within 24 hours. He hesitated. I'll talk to Mom. After we hung up, I felt something unfamiliar. Not triumph, not relief. Stability, like a structure settling onto a corrected beam. But deep down, I knew Arya wasn't done. She wasn't someone who surrendered control quietly. And sure enough, just before midnight, I received an email notification from an unfamiliar address, subject line regarding Henry Martin's estate, urgent review required. My stomach tightened, because if someone was now questioning the validity of my grandfather's letter to courage, this wasn't just a family correction anymore. It was about to become a legal war over legacy. Part 9, I didn't open the email right away. That might sound strange, but when you've spent years waiting for the other shoe to drop, you recognize the sound before it lands. Instead, I poured a glass of water and stood by the window in my office, watching the reflection of my own silhouette in the dark glass. For most of my life, I would have panicked at a subject line like that. Now, I felt something else. Readiness. Finally, I opened it. The message was brief. Open quote, Mr. Martin, we represent parties with interest in the estate of Henry Martin. Questions have arisen regarding the authenticity and enforceability of recently surfaced documents. We request immediate disclosure of all related materials before further action is taken. Regards, Wallace & Green, LLP. Close quote. I read it twice. Parties with interest, which meant one thing. Arya. She was moving fast. If she couldn't win the moral ground, she would challenge the legal one. I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow breath. Here's what she didn't know. My grandfather had never done anything informally. Ever. When he wrote that addendum, he didn't just scribble it on paper and tuck it in a drawer. He had witnesses. Lucia was one. The other was his longtime attorney, Mr. Hanley. and Mr. Hanley was meticulous. I checked my contacts and found his number. It rang twice. "Carter," he said, voice older but steady. "I wondered when you'd call," so he'd heard. "I just received an email from Wallace and Green," I said, a soft sigh on the other end. "Yes. Arya contacted them yesterday." "Not Samuel." "Arya. She's contesting the addendum. She's questioning its timing and claiming undue influence." I almost laughed. Undue influence, the irony. "And?" I asked. "And," he replied calmly, "the addendum was executed in my office, with witnesses, properly notarized. It is legally valid." Oh wait, I didn't know I was still carrying ease slightly. "She doesn't know that yet?" I asked. "She suspects," he said. "But suspicion isn't proof." I stared at the letter on my desk. "She's trying to intimidate me." "Yes." "Will it work?" A pause. "That depends," he said gently, "on whether you intend to use it." There it was again. The question. Use it. The addendum wasn't revenge, it was leverage. But leverage reshapes entire structures. "If I invoke succession," I said slowly, "it fractures the company permanently." "Possibly," he replied, "or it corrects it." After we hung up, I sat very still. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Samuel. "She contacted estate lawyers," he said without greeting. "I know." "You knew?" "I got the email too." Silence crackled between us. "I didn't tell her to do that," he said. I believed him. This wasn't Samuel's move. It was Arya's instinct. Control the narrative. Control the legacy. "She thinks you're trying to take everything," he said. "I'm trying to take back what's mine." He exhaled sharply. "Sunday," he said. "We'll do it." "You're sure?" "No," he admitted, "but I don't think we have a choice anymore." After we hung up, I walked into the small storage room at the back of my office and pulled out a flat archival box. Inside were printed copies of every Riverside draft, every timestamp log, every email exchange, and something else. A scanned copy of my original concept presentation to Callahan, the one I gave independently, dated 2 days before the family company's finalized contract. That date mattered, because it proved I had approached him transparently before any alleged restructuring. Justice through receipts. I returned to my desk and opened a new document. Subject line, conditions for resolution. Formal confirmation. I outlined everything clearly. Public apology at church. Written admission. Repayment per itemized record. Acknowledgement of co-lead status moving forward. I attached the ledger summary. Then I added one more line. Failure to comply by Sunday 6 p.m. will result in activation of Clause 14B and formal invocation of succession rights per Henry Martin's executed addendum. I stared at that sentence for a long time, then I hit send. Almost immediately, 3 dots appeared in my inbox. Arya. Her reply was short. Open quote, "You are making a mistake you can't undo." Close quote. I typed back one sentence. Open quote, "No, I'm correcting one you hoped I wouldn't notice." Close quote. I closed my laptop and leaned back. Sunday would be the second time this church held our family accountable. Only this time, there would be no surprise envelopes, no dramatic entrances, just truth. But as I reached for my coat to leave the office, my assistant poked her head into my doorway. "Carter?" "Yeah? There's someone here to see you." "At this hour?" She nodded. "Who?" She hesitated. "She says she used to work for your family company, and she has something you need to see." My stomach tightened. Because if someone else was coming forward, that meant the cracks weren't just internal anymore, and whatever she was holding might make Sunday a lot bigger than an apology. Part 10. Her name was Marisol Vega. The moment she stepped into my office, I recognized her. She'd worked in accounting at the family company for nearly 8 years. Quiet, efficient, the kind of employee who kept everything running while others took credit for leadership. She held a leather folder against her chest like it was fragile. "I'm sorry to show up like this," she said, standing just inside the doorway, "but after Sunday, I thought you should know." "Please," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "Sit." She didn't smile. She didn't relax. She opened the folder. Inside were printed spreadsheets, highlighted, annotated. My chest tightened. "I resigned yesterday," she said calmly, "effective immediately." "Why?" I asked, though I had a feeling I knew. "Because I was asked to reclassify expenses." That word again, reclassify. She slid one of the pages toward me. Line items from the Riverside project, design fees, consultation payments, consultant reimbursement. Only they weren't labeled that way. They were categorized under executive development strategy, paid out to Samuel Lopez, and under administrative oversight enhancement, Arya Davis. My pulse slowed in a way that felt almost dangerous. "How much?" I asked quietly. Marisol flipped to the summary page. The total was not small, not even close. It was almost exactly equal to the amount listed as deferred design compensation in my ledger. They hadn't just withheld my fees, they'd redirected them. My name had been removed from the contract, and my compensation had been redistributed. I looked up at her. "Why tell me?" She swallowed. "Because your grandfather hired me, and he told me once that if I ever saw something that didn't sit right, I should document it." Of course he did. "Do you have backups?" I asked. She nodded. "Everything is archived. I made copies before I resigned." "Does anyone else know?" She shook her head. "Not yet." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the spreadsheet. This wasn't favoritism. This wasn't optics. This was financial misrepresentation. And unlike family tension, that had consequences. Real ones. "You understand what this means?" I said carefully. "Yes. It could escalate." She met my eyes steadily. "I know." I studied her for a moment. Marisol wasn't dramatic. She wasn't angry. She looked tired, like someone who'd spent years balancing numbers that didn't add up morally. "Why now?" I asked softly. She gave the smallest shrug. "When they stood in that church and implied you were ungrateful, I realized I'd been complicit by staying quiet." That hit me harder than the spreadsheets. Complicit by staying quiet. I'd been quiet too, for years. But quiet and invisible aren't the same thing. I closed the folder gently. "Thank you," I said. She exhaled slowly, like she'd been holding that breath since Sunday. After she left, I sat alone in the office again. I placed Marisol's documents beside my ledger, side by side. The symmetry was almost clinical. They deferred my pay, then paid themselves under different labels, just as through receipts. My phone buzzed. Samuel. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. "What now?" he asked, voice tight. Marisol resigned. Silence. "She came to see me." Another pause. "What did she show you?" He asked carefully. I didn't soften it. "Reclassified design fees." Dead air. "That was accounting," he said quickly. "Temporary redistribution until what?" He didn't finish. "You paid yourself with my work," I said quietly. "That's not fair. Neither was removing my name." His breathing grew heavier through the phone. "You're going to use this against us. I'm going to use the truth." He didn't argue that. For the first time, I heard something new in his voice. Not arrogance, not defensiveness. Fear. "Mom doesn't know Marisol quit yet," he said. "She will. If this goes public, it doesn't have to." There was a long pause. "What do you want now?" he asked. Same question, different weight. "The same 3 conditions," I replied, "plus repayment of the reclassified funds." That's a lot of money." "It was mine," he exhaled sharply. "You're going to ruin us." I looked down at the spreadsheets again. "No," I said quietly. "I'm giving you a chance to repair what you did." Silence. Then, softer than I'd ever heard him, "She pushed me." I closed my eyes briefly. "I know." After we hung up, I stared at the church bulletin still sitting on my desk from Sunday. Apology, written admission, repayment. That had been enough. Now the foundation was cracked deeper than I thought, because if Marisol's documents held up, this wasn't just about my name, it was about misuse of project funds. And if Callahan saw these spreadsheets before Sunday, Clause 14B wouldn't just activate, there would be auditors. And if auditors came in, the apology at church would be the least of their concerns. And I had to decide, was I still offering correction, or was I about to trigger collapse? Part 11, I didn't sleep that night either. Not because I was anxious, because I was calculating. There's a moment in architecture when you discover a crack in a structure. You can patch it, you can reinforce around it, or you can strip it down to the studs and rebuild it correctly. Each option has a cost. By Saturday morning, my desk looked like a forensic exhibit. Grandfather's letter, the notarized addendum, the mirrored server logs, my itemized ledger, Marisol's reclassified expense sheets. If this went public beyond the church apology, it wouldn't stay contained to family embarrassment. It would become regulatory, legal, possibly criminal. That wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want sirens. I wanted accountability. My phone buzzed. "Dad," I answered. "She knows about Marisol," he said immediately. I assumed. "She's furious. At me? At everyone." I let that sit. "She says the reclassifications were temporary liquidity adjustments," he continued. I almost smiled at the phrasing. "Liquidity adjustments," I repeated. "She insists nothing illegal happened." "Intent matters less than documentation," I said quietly. He didn't respond to that. Carter, he said after a moment, if this escalates, the company could collapse. Employees could lose jobs. There it was. The weight, not just family, staff, workers, foremen, drafting teams, people who had nothing to do with Sunday or Riverside politics. I leaned back in my chair. I'm not trying to collapse the company, I said. But you could, yes. Silence stretched. What would stop you? He asked carefully. I thought about that. It wasn't more money, it wasn't humiliation, it was alignment. Transparency, I said finally. Full correction, no spin, no minimizing. He exhaled slowly. I'll talk to her. Saturday afternoon, Samuel texted, we'll agree to all conditions, including repayment. Sunday at 5, please don't show the additional documents. I stared at the screen. Please. That was new. I called him instead of replying. Is this you? I asked, or her? It's me, he said quietly. Does she agree? Long pause. She understands the alternative. Meaning, she didn't agree. She calculated. Samuel, I said, voice steady, if Sunday turns into another deflection, I won't hesitate. I know. His voice sounded tired, worn thin. I never meant for it to go this far, he added. I believe that too. Samuel liked winning. He didn't like detonations. But you let it, I said. He didn't argue. After we hung up, I walked down to the river. The riverside site sat quiet across the water, steel skeleton rising against gray sky. My design, my calculations, my months. I thought about invoking succession, first right of leadership. If I activated it, I could take full control, restructure everything, remove Arya entirely. But was that justice? Or retaliation dressed as reform? Sunday would answer that. By evening, Lucia stopped by my apartment unannounced, carrying takeout and that steady look she always had when something important was about to happen. You're thinking too much, she said, setting containers on the table. That's my job. She smiled faintly. Are you going to use the succession clause? I don't know. She studied me. Your grandfather didn't leave it for revenge, she said. He left it as protection. I know. Protection isn't the same as takeover. That landed. We ate in silence for a few minutes. Then she said, do you still want them in your life? The question caught me off guard. Not the company, the people, Samuel, Dad, even Arya. I stared at the table. I want honesty, I said slowly, if that's possible. And if it's not, I looked up. Then I walk. Lucia nodded. That's strength too. Sunday arrived colder than the week before. The same church, same stained glass, different energy. Word had spread enough that the pews filled early. Not gossipful, expectationful. At 4:58 p.m., I stood near the back again. Samuel stood near the front, Arya beside him, Dad between them. At exactly 5:02, the pastor stepped to the mic. Before we close today, he said carefully, there is something that needs to be addressed. The air tightened. Samuel stepped forward. For the first time in his life, there was no charm in his posture, only gravity. He took the microphone, and when he looked out over the congregation, his eyes found mine, and he said my name. Part 12, Carter Martin. Hearing my full name echo through that sanctuary felt different this time. Not like a warning, not like a whisper, like a reckoning. Samuel gripped the microphone with both hands. His knuckles were pale, but his voice, when it came, was steady. Last Sunday, he began, statements were made that implied Carter was not fully committed to our family business and that he misunderstood sacrifice. A murmur rippled lightly through the pews. He didn't look at Arya. He looked straight ahead. That was not accurate. The word accurate hung there carefully chosen, like he'd practiced it. Carter was the lead architect on the Riverside project. The original design work, sustainability modeling, and structural planning were his. There it was, out loud, in the same room. The pastor stood still beside him. Samuel continued. In the final contract submission, his name was removed without full disclosure. A few heads turned subtly. Arya stood motionless. I watched her profile, jaw tight, smile gone. Samuel swallowed. That decision was wrong. The word wrong hit heavier than inaccurate, and I take responsibility for it. He paused. Then, after a beat that stretched almost too long, I apologize. Silence followed. Not dramatic silence, processing silence. He lowered the mic slightly, then raised it again. There will also be a written statement sent to all investors and extended family clarifying authorship and equity. That was condition 2, delivered. And restitution will be made for deferred compensation related to Riverside. Condition 3, delivered. He turned slightly then, just enough to face me directly. I'm sorry, Carter. Not performative, not polished, human. I stood there absorbing it. This wasn't victory. It was correction. The pastor nodded gently and stepped forward to close the moment with a brief prayer about integrity and reconciliation. The congregation slowly began to move again. Whispers, nods, some surprised glances in my direction, but something felt unfinished, because Arya hadn't spoken, and everyone knew it. As people filtered toward the aisles, Arya stepped forward without being asked. She didn't take the microphone. She didn't need to. Her voice carried. I want to clarify something as well. The room stilled again. I believed I was protecting this company from instability, she said. I believed consolidating leadership would make us appear stronger. She looked at me. In doing so, I disregarded Carter's contributions. Carefully worded, not a confession, but not a denial either. That was an error in judgment. Error, not theft, not manipulation. Still, she had acknowledged it publicly. That mattered. What she didn't mention was the failed login or the reclassified funds. And I realized something important in that moment. I had a choice. I could pull the remaining receipts now, expose every spreadsheet, force a deeper collapse. Or I could accept the correction that had just been offered and reserve escalation for breach. Justice isn't about maximum damage, it's about proportional response. As the congregation began to disperse again, my dad approached me. Pride and regret lived side by side on his face. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for not seeing it sooner." I nodded once. "I know." Samuel approached next. He looked exhausted. "It's done," he said softly. "Not yet," I replied. His shoulders tensed. "The written statement," I clarified, "and the transfer." He nodded. "It'll be sent tonight." Arya lingered a few feet away, watching, calculating still, but something in her posture had shifted. Less dominance, more caution. Lucia appeared at my side like she always did when the air changed. "You handled that well," she murmured. "It's not over," I said. "No," she agreed, "but it's different now." As we stepped outside into the cooling evening, my phone buzzed, an email notification. From Samuel. Subject line, formal statement, draft for review. I opened it. The language was direct, clear acknowledgement of authorship, correction of equity representation, commitment to repayment. No spin, no minimization. It was done, for now. But as I stood on those church steps watching families load into cars and children chase each other across the lawn, a thought settled quietly in my chest. The apology repaired the public fracture. The contract correction repaired the legal one. But the financial reclassifications, those were still sitting in a folder on my desk. And if Arya ever decided to rewrite the narrative again, I wouldn't hesitate to open it. Because this time, I wasn't invisible. And I wasn't unprepared. But just as I slipped my phone into my pocket, Lucia touched my arm lightly. "There's one more thing," she said. "What?" She glanced toward the parking lot. "A man's been asking about you. Said he worked with your grandfather years ago." I frowned. "About what?" She hesitated. "He said Henry left something else behind." And suddenly the past wasn't finished speaking yet. Part 13, I didn't recognize him at first. He stood near the far edge of the church parking lot, hands in the pockets of a worn brown coat, posture straight despite his age. Late 60s, maybe early 70s, weathered face, observant eyes. He wasn't mingling. He was waiting. Lucia walked with me toward him. "Carter," she said gently, "this is Thomas Reed." The name clicked a second later. "Tom Reed?" I asked. "Grandpa's old project manager?" A faint smile tugged at his mouth. "Haven't heard that title in a while." We shook hands. His grip was firm. "I didn't want to interrupt inside," he said. "That wasn't my place." "You worked with my grandfather for years," I replied. "You had every place." He studied me for a moment, almost measuring. "You handled yourself well in there," he said quietly. "Thank you." He nodded once. "Henry always said you would." That sentence landed deeper than he probably intended. We moved a little farther from the lingering church crowd. "I wasn't sure if I should come," Tom admitted, "but after what happened last week, I figured it was time." "For what?" I asked. He glanced at Lucia briefly, then back at me. "Your grandfather didn't just leave a letter." My pulse slowed. "He left a contingency plan." The phrase felt heavy. "What kind of plan?" Tom reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded document, not as ceremonial as Lucia's envelope, but deliberate. "This isn't a legal instrument like the addendum," he clarified. "It's operational." He handed it to me. I unfolded it carefully. It was typed, dated 2 years before his death. Title at the top, Leadership Transition Framework, Draft Proposal. My throat tightened. This was never finalized, Tom said, because Henry didn't want to trigger conflict unless necessary. I scanned the document quickly. It outlined a phased leadership model, separation of ownership from operational authority, independent financial oversight, architectural and development divisions split into distinct reporting lines, and at the bottom, recommended interim director Carter Martin upon licensure and independent capacity verification. I looked up slowly. He believed the company needed structural reform, Tom said quietly. He just didn't think it would happen peacefully. I let out a slow breath. So he prepared. Yes. Lucia crossed her arms gently. Henry hated instability, but he hated injustice more. Tom nodded. He saw the favoritism, he added. Not loudly, but clearly. That stung, because part of me had always wondered if I'd imagined it. Why didn't he say anything? I asked. He did, Tom replied. To me, to Lucia, to his attorney. But confronting it directly would have fractured the family while he was still alive. I stared back down at the framework. It wasn't a takeover plan. It was a stabilization blueprint, audit protocols, independent accounting, clear authorship documentation standards, checks and balances. It was everything that had gone wrong with Riverside and everything that could prevent it from happening again. He wanted this implemented only if misconduct occurred, Tom said. That threshold may have been met. Lucia gave me a sideways look. He trusted you to know the difference between revenge and reform. That sentence sat heavy, because this was the third twist I hadn't expected. Not just protection, preparation. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Samuel. I silenced it without looking. Tom studied me carefully. You don't look like a man who wants to burn something down, he said. I don't. Good. He nodded once. Because this isn't about winning. It's about whether the company survives the next 20 years. That reframed everything. This wasn't just about apology and repayment. It was about governance, structure, prevention. Justice through receipts wasn't just proving the past, it was building a future that couldn't erase someone quietly. Does my dad know about this? I asked. Tom shook his head. Henry wanted it revealed only if the company proved it needed reform. I exhaled slowly. And I knew. It needed reform. But reform required agreement, consent. And Arya would never voluntarily support structural oversight, unless she had no alternative. My phone buzzed again. Samuel, I finally checked the message. We sent the written statement. Investors acknowledged receipt. Can we meet tomorrow? Just us. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. Tom watched me. They're feeling the shift, he said quietly. Yes. And what are you going to do with it? I looked down at the leadership framework again. I could activate succession, take control, remove Arya from decision-making entirely. Or I could present this framework as the condition for moving forward. Independent oversight, transparent accounting, shared leadership, not revenge. Reform. Lucia touched my arm. Henry believed in foundations, she said softly. You don't patch cracks, you reinforce the base. The evening air felt colder now, clearer. I folded the document carefully. I'm not taking the company, I said slowly. Lucia and Tom both watched me. I'm restructuring it. And for the first time since Sunday, the path forward didn't look like collapse. It looked like construction. But I knew one thing for certain. Arya Davis was not going to accept oversight quietly. And tomorrow's meeting with Samuel would determine whether this ended in reform or a second fracture far more permanent than the first. Part 14, Samuel showed up alone. That was the first sign something had shifted. He didn't text when he arrived. He didn't posture in the lobby. He walked straight into my office like someone entering a place he finally understood he didn't control. You look different, he said after a moment. Different how? Like you already decided something. I gestured for him to sit. I did. He leaned back, wary. Before you say anything, he began. The written statement went out exactly as drafted. Investors responded positively. Callahan confirmed the hold will lift if no further disputes arise. That's good, I said. He nodded once, studying my face. So what now? I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out Tom Reed's document, the Leadership Transition Framework. I slid it across the table. Samuel glanced down at the title. His brow furrowed. What is this? Grandpa's contingency plan. His head snapped up. There's more? Yes. He picked up the document and began reading. The silence stretched long enough that I could hear the faint hum of the HVAC system. As his eyes moved down the page, his expression shifted, from confusion to recognition to discomfort. He wrote this? He asked quietly. Yes. He thought we'd need oversight? He thought the company needed structural reform. Samuel swallowed. This is basically corporate governance. It's accountability, I corrected. He flipped through the pages. Independent accounting audits, separation of executive compensation approval, mandatory dual sign-off for contract revisions, documented authorship standards, transparent equity reporting. He looked up at me slowly. You want to implement this? Yes. His jaw tightened. That sidelines Mom. It limits unilateral authority. Same thing to her. I didn't argue that. This isn't about humiliating anyone, I said calmly. It's about preventing what just happened from ever happening again. He stared at the document again. She'll see this as a coup. She'll see it as oversight. And if she refuses, I held his gaze. Then I invoked succession. There it was. Not shouted, not threatened, stated. His shoulders dropped slightly. You're serious. I've never been more serious. He looked tired again, older than his age. You know she'll fight. I know. He ran a hand through his hair. She thinks you've been building this whole thing in secret. I have. That makes her nervous. It should. Silence settled between us. For the first time, this wasn't a rivalry. It was a crossroads. You don't actually want to run everything alone, do you? He asked quietly. No. That surprised him. I want the company to work, I said, with transparency, with shared authority, with documented decision-making. He exhaled slowly. She'll say you're punishing her. I'm protecting myself. He studied me for a long moment. And me? He asked. What about you? Do you still want me involved? That question carried more weight than he probably realized, because for years I'd imagined walking away entirely, letting him have the spotlight, building my own empire elsewhere. But this wasn't about ego, it was about legacy. I want you accountable, I said carefully, not erased. His eyes flickered. That's fair. He looked back down at the framework. If we agree to this, he said slowly, you don't activate the succession clause? No. And you don't release the accounting spreadsheets? Not if repayment is completed and compliance begins. He nodded once, then sat back in his chair. You realize, he said quietly, this changes everything. Yes. No more quiet adjustments. Yes. No more narrative control. Yes. He let out a breath that sounded almost like relief. You know what the worst part of all this is? He said suddenly. What? I actually thought you didn't care. The words landed unexpectedly. I thought you were fine staying behind the scenes. I thought you preferred it. I almost laughed. I was fine building, I said. I just didn't expect to be erased. He nodded slowly. I think she was afraid of you. Why? Because you don't need applause. That hung in the air. Applause fades. Documentation doesn't. He stood. I'll bring this to her tonight. I didn't stop him. But Samuel, I added. He paused at the door. If she tries to rewrite this again, if there's even a hint of manipulation. I know, he said quietly. Succession. Clause 14b. Audit exposure. He understood now. After he left, I sat alone with the framework still open on my desk. This wasn't revenge. It was restructuring power. The kind that doesn't scream. The kind that stabilizes. But just as I was closing the document, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. Ray, is this Carter Martin? Yes. This is Wallace and Green. We'd like to schedule a formal estate review meeting. Ms. Davis has submitted a claim alleging financial mismanagement tied to the trust you accessed. I went still. Trust? She's claiming what? I asked evenly. Improper use of inherited funds in conflict with family business interests. I felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't about succession anymore. This was escalation. Aria wasn't fighting the company's structure. She was coming for my funding source. And if she could freeze the trust, she could stall Riverside and force my hand. The call ended with a proposed meeting date. I set the phone down slowly. She had just made this bigger than governance, bigger than apology. She was trying to paint me as the destabilizing force, and if she pushed this publicly, the narrative could flip again. But what Arya didn't know was that the trust wasn't just a lump sum inheritance, it had conditions. And one of those conditions required a written letter from the trustee, a letter I'd never opened, because until now, I hadn't needed to. Part 15. The envelope had been sitting in my fireproof safe for 3 years. Cream paper, thick. My grandfather's attorney's return address embossed in small, understated lettering at the top. It had arrived 2 weeks after the funeral with a short note. to be opened if financial control is challenged or integrity is questioned. At the time, I thought it was ceremonial. Legal language meant to sound dramatic. Now it felt surgical. I locked my office door before I took it out. The weight of it surprised me again. Not heavy, but intentional, like something that knew exactly when it would matter. Arya filing a claim against the trust wasn't just defensive. It was strategic. If she could freeze or question the source of my capital, she could undermine every contract I'd independently secured. Investors don't panic over family drama. They panic over alleged mismanagement. She was trying to recast me as reckless. I slid a letter opener under the seal and broke it carefully. Inside were 3 documents. The first was a formal trustee clarification signed and notarized. It stated that the architectural trust established under my grandfather's estate was entirely separate from Martin Family Development Holdings. No board member, officer, or shareholder had authority to audit, freeze, or interfere with its funds. The second document was a schedule of conditional disbursement. My pulse slowed as I read it. The trust wasn't just an inheritance, it was a staged release account tied to professional milestones. Licensure verification, completed. Independent firm registration, completed. First third-party commercial contract, completed. And then the final condition. In the event of reputational attack or contractual erasure within Martin Family Development, the trustee shall release full remaining balance immediately and authorize independent legal defense. I read that line twice, then 3 times. Reputational attack or contractual erasure. The exact phrase. My grandfather hadn't guessed. He had anticipated. The third document was handwritten. I recognized the pen immediately, his old black fountain pen, the one he insisted wrote smoother than anything modern. Carter, if you are reading this, it means they've mistaken your quiet for weakness. You will be tempted to prove yourself louder. Don't. Paper outlasts volume. You were never meant to compete for control. You were meant to build something that can stand without asking permission. If they challenge your integrity, let the truth be documented. If they challenge your capacity, let your work speak. If they challenge your funding, remember, I did not invest in you conditionally. Do not beg for a seat at a table you can design yourself. Henry Thirst sat back slowly. For years, I thought the trust was simply support. It was leverage, not for domination, for independence. Arya had just triggered the final release clause, which meant that instead of freezing my resources, she had accelerated them. My phone buzzed again. Samuel. Mom is furious. She says this governance framework undermines her authority. She's meeting with the estate lawyers tomorrow. I stared at the message. Estate lawyers. So that's how fast she moved. I typed back slowly. She already filed a claim. There was a pause. Then what? I received notice this morning. 3 dots. 3 dots. Then nothing. I folded the handwritten letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope, separate from the legal documents. The trustee clarification, though, that I scanned immediately. Digital copy, secure cloud, redundant storage, justice through receipts. I wasn't going to announce this. Not yet. Let her file, let her allege, because once the trustee responded formally, her claim would collapse publicly. And unlike the church moment, this wouldn't be emotional, it would be procedural, which in business is far more devastating. I stood and walked to the window overlooking the street. People were moving normally below, coffee shops, traffic, life happening without any awareness of the quiet war unfolding in conference rooms and law offices. For the first time since Sunday, I wasn't reacting. I was ahead. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Samuel. It was a number I recognized immediately. Wallace and Green. I answered. Yes? Mr. Martin, the woman on the line said professionally, we've received supplementary documentation from the trustee. It appears Miss Davis was not authorized to submit the inquiry she filed. I let the silence stretch. I see, I said calmly. There will be no freeze on your trust assets. Additionally, the trustee has indicated that any further interference attempts will be considered breach of estate compliance. Breach. That word would sting. I appreciate the clarification, I replied. Of course. We will notify Ms. Davis formally this afternoon. I ended the call. There it was. Tiny detail. 1 clause. 1 notarized clarification. And the narrative she'd tried to build collapsed instantly. My phone buzzed again. Samuel. She just got the call. I imagined Arya's expression. Not anger. Calculation. Because now she knew. I wasn't operating on borrowed support. I was operating on protected independence. And if she continued to escalate, the estate itself could sanction her, which meant she wasn't just fighting me. She was defying my grandfather's documented structure. That was a fight she couldn't win publicly. I exhaled slowly. This wasn't over, not even close. But the balance of power had shifted again, and tonight, for the first time, Aria Davis understood something she had refused to see for years. I wasn't the invisible one anymore, and I wasn't the one asking permission. Part 16, Aria didn't call me. That was how I knew she was recalibrating. When she was angry, she called. Sharp, direct, controlled volume, surgical phrasing. But when she went quiet, it meant she was reworking the board in her head. By late afternoon, Samuel texted, "She wants a meeting, all three of us, tonight, at the house. The house, not the office, not neutral ground. Her territory." I stared at the message for a long moment before replying. Fine. 7 p.m. The house looked the same as it always had. Immaculate landscaping, warm exterior lighting, the illusion of harmony. I hadn't walked through that front door in months. When Aria opened it, her expression was composed. Not warm, not hostile, measured. "Carter," she said evenly. "Aria." Samuel stood just behind her in the foyer, shoulders tight. We moved into the sitting room instead of the dining room. No formal place settings, no performance of family dinner. Just 3 chairs angled toward each other like a negotiation, because that's what it was. Aria folded her hands in her lap. "I received clarification from the trustee," she began. "I assumed you would." She didn't rise to that. "It seems," she continued smoothly, "that Henry structured the trust with more autonomy than I anticipated." That's one way to put it. Her eyes flickered, just slightly. "You could have disclosed that provision earlier. You didn't ask." Silence. Samuel shifted in his seat. "This doesn't need to be adversarial," he interjected carefully. "It already became adversarial," I said, still looking at Aria. "When you filed a claim against my integrity." Her jaw tightened. "I filed a procedural inquiry. You alleged mismanagement. I sought clarity from lawyers." She exhaled slowly. "Your independent funding changed the balance of decision-making," she said. "As CEO, I am obligated to understand external influences." "I am not an external influence," I replied. "I'm a partner whose name was removed from a contract." That landed. Samuel looked down. Aria's voice remained calm. "And we corrected that. After public exposure," her composure thinned. "You humiliated this family in church." I almost laughed at the revision. "I responded to humiliation," I said quietly. "There's a difference." Her eyes flashed. "By weaponizing legal technicalities, by presenting documentation." We stared at each other. Same room, different philosophies. Samuel leaned forward. "Can we please move to the actual issue?" he said. "The governance framework." Aria didn't break eye contact with me. "You intend to restructure leadership?" "Yes." "You intend to limit my authority?" "I intend to prevent unilateral control." Silence stretched tight. "And if I refuse?" she asked. I held her gaze. "Then I invoke succession." Samuel closed his eyes briefly. There it was again. Not loud, not dramatic, just fact. Aria leaned back slowly. "You think the board would support that?" "Yes. Confidence unsettles people more than anger ever could." She studied me carefully. "You've been preparing," she said. "Yes." "For how long?" "Long enough." Another silence, then something shifted. Not defeat, assessment. "What exactly are your conditions?" she asked finally. There it was, not whether. What? I took a slow breath. "A public apology," I said evenly. "In the church, during Sunday service, the same place my credibility was questioned." Samuel inhaled sharply. Aria's expression hardened. "You're asking for spectacle." "I'm asking for symmetry," I continued. "Second, written admission sent to the entire extended family and board. Clear acknowledgement of authorship removal and financial misallocation." Her lips pressed thin. "And third, repayment per the itemized record, full reimbursement of diverted project bonuses and percentage adjustments." Samuel looked between us. "That's a lot," he murmured. "It's accurate," I replied. Aria's voice cooled further. "You want me to stand up and confess? I want you to correct the record. And if I refuse?" I didn't blink. "Succession, independent audit, full release of accounting spreadsheets." The air in the room felt thinner. This wasn't revenge. This was boundary setting with consequences. Aria stood slowly and walked toward the window. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked older, not weaker, just aware. "You've positioned yourself carefully," she said without turning. "I learned from you." That landed harder than anything else I'd said. She turned back slowly. And if I agree, she asked quietly, this ends? This resets. Samuel leaned forward. Mom, he said softly, the investors already know. The board suspects. Dragging this out only hurts the company more. She looked at him, really looked, and something unspoken passed between them. Finally, she faced me again. I will not be ambushed again, she said. You won't be. You draft the statement. I approve wording. No revisions that dilute responsibility. Her jaw tightened, but she nodded once. And the service? This Sunday. 5 days, she exhaled. Fine. Samuel looked stunned. Wait, you're agreeing? Arya didn't answer him. She was still looking at me. This is the last time you corner me publicly, she said quietly. I didn't corner you, I replied. I documented you. Another beat of silence. Then she did something I hadn't expected. She extended her hand, formal, professional. I stood and shook it. Her grip was steady, cold. This resets, she repeated. For the company, I said. But as I walked toward the door, one thought wouldn't leave me. Arya Davis did not surrender. She strategized. And agreeing this quickly meant she was planning something else, something I hadn't seen yet. And Sunday might not go as cleanly as she just promised. Part 17 Sunday came faster than I expected, maybe because I barely slept all week. Drafting the written admission had been surgical work. Every sentence mattered. Not dramatic, not emotional, just factual. On Thursday night, Arya sent back her edits. There were fewer than I expected. No deflections, no misunderstandings, no passive phrasing. She left one comment in the margin. Remove the phrase intentional removal, replace with administrative override. I didn't. Instead, I replied with one sentence. System logs indicate manual credential access at 11:43 p.m. on March 12th. She didn't respond after that, because she knew. That tiny timestamp, the one that had started everything, was still the quietest weapon in the room. The church filled slowly Sunday morning. Word had spread, not officially, but families talk. Board members attend services, so do investors' spouses. This wasn't just a congregation, it was an audience. Samuel stood near the front pew, hands clasped, eyes forward. He looked pale. Arya sat one row behind him, composed, impeccable, navy suit, pearl earrings. The version of herself that built empires. When I walked in, I didn't take a seat. I stood along the side wall near the aisle, not hiding, just observing. The service moved normally at first. Hymns, announcements, a baptism scheduled for later in the hour. Pastor Williams reached the mid-service pause, the moment before the sermon. Arya stood. The shift in air was immediate. Pastor Williams looked surprised but stepped aside. She walked to the front. No microphone tremor, no hesitation. I need to address something, she began. Her voice carried clearly. Last Sunday during this service, statements were made that questioned the integrity and authorship of a project within our family business. No drama, just controlled tone. I have since reviewed documented evidence. A pause. And I was wrong. A murmur rippled through the room. She continued. Carter Martin was the original architect and primary contributor to the Riverside Cultural Center proposal. His name was removed from the submission under my authorization. There it was. No administrative override, no vague phrasing, under my authorization. Samuel stared at the floor. I allowed favoritism and internal bias to influence professional decisions, she said. That line hadn't been in my draft. She added it herself. I apologized publicly for the harm that caused. The church was silent, utterly. Then she did something I hadn't expected. She turned, not toward Pastor Williams, toward me. Carter, she said evenly, I'm sorry. No flourish, no tears, just clarity. And somehow that hit harder than theatrics ever could. I nodded once. She stepped back. The pastor cleared his throat gently and resumed the service, but the atmosphere had changed permanently. This wasn't gossip anymore. It was record. Afterward, people approached carefully. Some offered quiet congratulations. Others avoided eye contact entirely. Samuel found me near the side exit. She did it, he said, almost stunned. Yes. I didn't think she would actually say favoritism. Neither did I, he swallowed. She rewrote part of it herself. I noticed. We stood in silence for a moment. I sent the written admission this morning, he added. Board and extended family. No edits. Good, he hesitated. You're not gloating. No. He searched my face. Why? Because this wasn't victory. It was correction. Before I could answer, Lucia appeared beside us. Her eyes were warm. Henry would have appreciated that, she said quietly. Appreciated what? Samuel asked. The discipline. Samuel nodded slowly. Arya exited the church, surrounded by a few board members. Their expressions were neutral, thoughtful, not hostile, which meant the narrative had shifted. But as I stepped into the sunlight, my phone buzzed. Unknown number again, I answered. Carter Martin. A male voice responded. This is Callahan Development's legal counsel. My chest tightened slightly. Yes? We've received a competing submission regarding Riverside. Competing? From whom? A newly formed entity, Davis Urban Group. My stomach dropped. That's not possible, I said carefully. The proposal includes revised architectural drawings, modified but clearly derivative. Derivative, which meant they'd taken my design, adjusted it, and resubmitted under a different corporate structure. When was this submitted, I asked. Friday evening, 2 days ago. While we were finalizing the apology, while she was agreeing publicly, Arya hadn't surrendered, she'd diversified. I looked up slowly, across the parking lot. She was watching me, not angry, not flustered, calculating. The public apology had reset one narrative, but she'd already started another. And if Callahan accepted the derivative proposal, the authorship battle would ignite again. Except this time, it wouldn't be inside our family, it would be corporate warfare. And she had just shown me she wasn't done playing, at part 18. For a split second, I considered walking straight across the parking lot and confronting her, demanding an explanation, forcing clarity. But I didn't move, because if there's one thing architecture teaches you, it's this: never react to surface cracks without understanding the load beneath them. Derivative how? I asked the attorney on the phone. The structural concept and site orientation mirror your original submission, he said. However, facade elements and material specs have been adjusted. Adjusted. That was careful language. Is it legally distinct? I asked. There was a pause. Not entirely. My pulse slowed instead of spiking. And your position? I asked. We requested clarification before moving forward. Thank you, I said. Please do not review or circulate the derivative drawings until authorship is verified. Understood. The call ended. Across the lot, Arya's gaze didn't waver. She knew I'd been informed. Samuel noticed the tension first. What happened? He asked. Callahan received a second proposal, I said evenly. His face drained of color. From who? Davis Urban Group. He went still. That's not even fully registered yet. It was registered Friday, I said. I checked corporate filings last night. He stared at me. You knew? I monitor things. Justice through receipts. He ran a hand over his face. She told me we were focusing on compliance this week. She was, I said, while launching a parallel entity. Samuel's voice dropped. She's trying to hedge. No, I corrected gently. She's trying to isolate me. He looked up sharply. If Callahan accepts the Davis Urban version, I continued, the narrative becomes collaborative divergence. Not erasure, not theft, just creative differences. Samuel exhaled slowly. That would neutralize your leverage. Yes, and make the church apology look unnecessary. Overreactive, I finished. His shoulders sagged. Across the lot, Arya finally turned away and stepped into her car. She wasn't hiding, she was signaling. This was chess, and she had just advanced a piece I hadn't anticipated. But here's what she didn't know. There was a second tiny detail she hadn't accounted for. The system log wasn't just a timestamp. It tracked file access history. And when she downloaded the original Riverside CAD files, it recorded the export, including the unique metadata signature embedded in my drafting software. Architects leave fingerprints in layers most people never see. Line weight calibration, grid origin settings, even template markers invisible on printouts. If her derivative submission pulled from my native file, the metadata would prove it, instantly. I turned back to Samuel. Does she think I don't keep archive logs? He shook his head slowly. She thinks you won't escalate. I almost smiled. Escalation wasn't the goal. Documentation was. Call a meeting, I said. Tonight, board and legal. Tonight? Yes. His jaw tightened. She'll be furious. She already is. He hesitated. You're not going to sue her, are you? Not if I don't have to. Then what? Independent forensic comparison. He stared at me. Public, private first. And that was the difference between us. Area weaponized narrative. I weaponized proof. By 6 p.m., we were back in the conference room. Board members seated. Arya at the head of the table, composed. You called this meeting, she said evenly. Yes. Samuel distributed printed packets. Inside, side-by-side renderings, my original Riverside submission and the Davis Urban derivative. Even at a glance, the resemblance was unmistakable. Coincidence, Arya said calmly. Open page 3, I replied. They did. There, highlighted in yellow, was embedded metadata. File origin tag CMArchRIVE03. Creation timestamp February 2nd, 10:17 a.m. Modification log exported March 14th, 11:52 p.m. User credentials A. Davis or admin. Silence. Heavy. One tiny detail. One invisible tag. And every lie collapsed. Arya didn't flinch, but her fingers tightened slightly on the table. This proves file access, she said coolly. Not intent. It proves derivation, I corrected, which voids independent submission claims. A board member cleared his throat. Arya, he said carefully, were you aware the new entity submission included Carter's base files? She held his gaze. I authorized exploration of alternate branding structures, she said. The design is company property. No, I said evenly. Authorship rights were restored in writing, including derivative protections. Samuel spoke quietly. It was in the admission letter. She shot him a look. But it was too late. The room had shifted, not toward outrage, toward clarity. A second board member leaned forward. This is exactly why governance reform is necessary. There it was, not my voice, theirs. Arya inhaled slowly, then did something unexpected. She stood. Then perhaps reform is overdue, she said evenly. No defense, no denial, just pivot. But I could see it, the calculation behind her eyes. She wasn't conceding, she was repositioning. The meeting adjourned with a unanimous vote to suspend the Davis urban submission pending review. For now, the derivative plan was frozen. As people filtered out, Arya stopped beside me. You came prepared, she said quietly. Yes. She studied me for a long moment. Henry trained you better than I realized. No, I replied softly. He trusted me better than you did. That one landed. She walked out without another word. Samuel lingered. This is bigger than a contract now, he murmured. Yes. What are you going to do? I looked at the governance framework still sitting in front of me. Reform wasn't optional anymore. It was inevitable. But reform would require more than public apologies. It would require structural change. And Arya, for all her precision, had just proven she would build parallel structures before surrendering control, which meant the next move would determine whether this company stabilized or split permanently. Part 19, by Monday morning, the word wasn't conflict, it was instability. That's how board members phrase things when they're worried about shareholders, but still pretending it's all under control. I arrived early to the office, earlier than usual. The city was still stretching awake, delivery trucks idling, coffee shops unlocking doors. I like buildings before people fill them. You can hear their systems breathe. My phone buzzed before I even made it to my desk. Samuel. 3 board members requested a formal governance vote. They want timelines. Of course they did. Public apology, written admission, forensic proof of derivative submission. Now the only logical next step was structural reform. Not because of me, because they'd seen enough. I poured coffee and opened my laptop. There were already emails flagged confidential, legal summaries, risk assessments, investor notes using phrases like confidence restoration and long-term operational clarity. Justice through receipts doesn't just clear your name. It forces systems to show their seams. At 9 a.m., we gathered in the same conference room as the night before. Arya was already seated. Perfect posture, perfect composure. But something was different. She wasn't defending. She was listening. The board chair, Mr. Ellison, cleared his throat. Given recent events, he began carefully, it's clear our current structure lacks sufficient checks and balances. No one argued, he continued. We need formal separation between executive authority and contract authorship oversight. That was straight out of the leadership transition framework. Arya's eyes flicked toward me briefly, then back to the chair. We propose implementation of an independent audit committee, Ellison added, effective immediately. Silence. Then, all in favor? Hands rose around the table. One by one, including Samuel's. Arya's hand remained on the table for 3 seconds, 4, then slowly she raised it 2. Unanimous, I felt something shift in my chest. Not triumph, relief. The chair continued. Additionally, we recommend co-directorship of architectural development under Carter Martin. That one hit harder. Not temporary oversight. Co-directorship. It wasn't succession. It was shared power. Samuel looked at me carefully. Arya didn't react visible in favor. Again, hands rose, unanimous. I hadn't asked for this. I hadn't campaigned. I'd presented documentation. The system corrected itself. The vote ended. Meeting adjourned. People filed out quietly, already discussing next steps and audit schedules. When the room emptied, it was just the three of us. Arya remained seated. "You've achieved your objective," she said evenly. "I achieved transparency," I replied. She studied me for a moment. "You think this stabilizes things?" "I know it does." She leaned back slightly. "You underestimate how uncomfortable shared authority can become." "I'm not uncomfortable," I said calmly. She held my gaze. "That's not what I meant." Samuel shifted. "Mom," she raised a hand gently to silence him. Then she looked back at me. "You don't realize it yet," she said quietly, "but power reshapes relationships." "I'm not interested in power," I replied. "That's why you're dangerous." There it was again. Not insult. Observation. She stood slowly. "I will comply with the restructuring," she said. "Fully." I nodded once. "And Davis Urban?" I asked. "It will dissolve," she replied. "Effective today." That surprised me. "You're not going to fight that? It's redundant now." She walked toward the door, then paused. "Henry didn't just prepare you financially," she said without turning. "He prepared you psychologically." She left before I could respond. Samuel let out a breath. "That went smoother than I expected." "Yes, but smooth doesn't mean simple." The rest of the day moved fast. Audit schedules set, access permissions revised, dual signature protocols implemented, tiny structural reinforcements everywhere. By late afternoon, I finally sat alone in my office. Sunlight slanted across the drafting table. I opened the Riverside model again, rotated it slightly, zoomed into the central atrium. This building had caused fractures, but it would also anchor reform. My phone buzzed. "Lucia, have you checked the old storage unit?" I frowned. "What storage unit?" A pause. Then, Henry's secondary archive. He instructed me to mention it only if governance reform was implemented. My pulse slowed. "Secondary archive? Where?" She sent an address. A small warehouse space across town, rented under an LLC I didn't recognize. My grandfather had loved redundancy, not paranoia. Redundancy. I locked my office and drove. The warehouse was unremarkable. Gray metal doors, industrial district. Lucia was already there when I arrived. "You didn't think that was everything, did you?" she asked gently. "What is this?" I asked. "Perspective," she replied. Inside, the space was organized meticulously. Shelving units, archived blueprints, boxes labeled by year, and at the back, a single metal filing cabinet, locked. Lucia handed me a small brass key. "He told me to give you this when the company chose structure over ego," she said softly. My chest tightened. I unlocked the cabinet. Inside were folders, each labeled, board assessments, performance reviews, private memos, and one thick envelope marked, "If reform succeeds." I looked at Lucia. She nodded once. "Open it," I did. Inside, another handwritten letter, and a document I hadn't expected, stock certificates, additional shares, transferred quietly to my name, dated a week before his death, enough to shift voting control permanently. I stared at the number. "Why didn't he execute this earlier?" I asked. "He believed people reveal themselves when given opportunity," Lucia said. "He wanted the company to choose reform voluntarily. And if it hadn't, then this would have been your safeguard." I exhaled slowly. He hadn't just prepared for conflict, he'd prepared for growth. This wasn't leverage for revenge, it was insurance for integrity. I folded the certificate carefully. "I don't need this," I said quietly. Lucia smiled gently. "That's why he gave it to you." As we stepped back into the fading light, I realized something. The biggest twist wasn't the trust, or the logs, or the derivative collapse. It was this. My grandfather had never intended for me to fight alone. He had built layers, quiet ones, and now the company was stabilizing. Governance implemented, authority shared, narrative corrected. But as I drove home, one thought lingered. If reform had succeeded, why leave me controlling shares? What future conflict had he still anticipated, and who had he been preparing me to outlast? Part 20, I didn't tell anyone about the shares. Not Samuel, not the board, not even my attorney. I locked the certificates in the same safe as the trust letter and let the knowledge sit quietly in the back of my mind like reinforced steel inside a wall, present but invisible. Reform had technically succeeded. The audit committee began work that week. Independent accountants combed through 5 years of contracts. Access logs were standardized. No more unilateral overrides, no more quiet edits. On the surface, Martin Development looked healthier than it had in years, which is exactly when people start testing the new structure. Tuesday afternoon, I was reviewing material bids for Riverside when an internal notification popped up. Permission request. Executive override. Budget allocation. Requested by A. Davis. I stared at the screen. The system now required dual approval for reallocating funds over a certain threshold. She knew that. The request was routed to both me and the audit chair. The amount? $1.2 million. Reallocation category, strategic external consultation. That was vague enough to hide almost anything. I didn't decline immediately. I walked down the hall instead. Her office door was open. She was on the phone but ended the call when she saw me. Yes? She said calmly. I received the override request, she nodded. It's time sensitive. For what? A national advisory firm. Which one? She slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a proposal from a well-known corporate consultancy. Expensive, prestigious, reputation repair specialists. You think we need image management? I asked. I think investors have long memories. We've already addressed the issue publicly. Public apologies don't stabilize stock confidence, she replied evenly. Strategic narrative does. There it was again. Narrative. You want to spend $1.2 million on reputation consultants, I said carefully. I want to prevent further erosion. Of what? Authority. The honesty surprised me. I studied her for a moment. Or control, I asked quietly. Her gaze didn't waver. They're not mutually exclusive. I leaned back slightly. Why wasn't this brought to the board? It will be, after approval. That's not how the new structure works. A flicker in her eyes. Tiny. You don't trust my judgment, she said. I don't bypass process. Silence stretched. She stood slowly. You think governance reform means paralysis? I think it means transparency. Her jaw tightened. And what if the board votes no? Then we explore alternatives. She crossed her arms. You're enjoying this. No, I replied honestly. I'm enforcing it. We stood there for a long second. Finally, she exhaled. Fine, bring it to the audit committee. I nodded once. As I turned to leave, she added quietly, You've never had to manage perception at scale. I paused. I've never needed to, I said. Back in my office, I forwarded the proposal to the committee with one additional attachment, a cost-benefit breakdown, projected investor retention models, historical recovery timelines for similar firms, receipts. By evening, the committee responded. Vote 4-1 against external consultancy at this stage. Rationale, insufficient evidence of long-term reputational damage requiring external intervention. Process held. Structure where her request lingered. It wasn't just about optics, it was about discomfort. She had built her career on singular authority, and now every decision required consensus. For someone like Arya, that felt like erosion. That night, Samuel stopped by my office unannounced. She's not sleeping, he said. Because of the audit? Because she feels sidelined. She voted for reform. She voted because she had to. He leaned against the doorframe. You don't understand what this company is to her. I understand exactly, I said quietly. That's why it needs guardrails. He studied me for a moment. She thinks you're waiting. For what? For her to slip. I almost smiled. She already slipped, I said. That's why we're here. He sighed. She built this. She built control, I corrected. Grandpa built foundation. Silence. You don't hate her, do you? He asked suddenly. No. Then what do you feel? I considered that. Measured, he frowned slightly. That's not an emotion. It is when you've been invisible long enough. He nodded slowly. As he left, my phone buzzed again. Lucia, have you read the second page of the letter? I frowned. There was only one page. A pause. Then, check again. I drove home, unlocked the safe, and unfolded the handwritten letter carefully. At first glance, it looked the same, but when I held it to the light, there was faint writing pressed into the paper beneath, indented, like he'd written on a sheet above it. I grabbed a pencil and gently shaded over the surface. Letters emerged slowly. If reform succeeds, the next threat will not be corruption. My breath slowed. It will be fear. I continued shading. Fear of irrelevance. Fear of diminished control. Fear makes good leaders make desperate choices. The final line appeared last. Protect the company from desperation, even if it comes from someone you love. I sat back slowly. This wasn't about audits anymore. It wasn't about derivative submissions. It was about something more fragile. Arya wasn't fighting for money. She was fighting against becoming obsolete. And desperate leaders make reckless decisions. My phone buzzed again. Samuel, Mom just scheduled a private meeting with Ellison. No notice. I stared at the message. Fear, desperation, private meeting, and suddenly, reform didn't feel finished. It felt tested. Part 21. When Samuel texted me about the private meeting, I didn't call him back. I didn't call Arya either. If there's one thing I've learned over the past few weeks, it's that reacting emotionally gives fear momentum. And according to my grandfather's second ghost-written page, fear was the next threat. Not corruption, not ego. Fear. I waited until the next morning to act. Instead of barging into Ellison's office, I requested a formal agenda review for the upcoming quarterly board session. Routine, boring, procedural, receipts don't shout, they schedule. By 10 a.m., I had confirmation that Arya had indeed met with Ellison the night before. Private dinner, off-site. Samuel slipped into my office mid-morning. She told him reform is creating operational gridlock, he said quietly, that we're moving too slowly to stay competitive. And what did he say? He didn't commit to anything. Good. That's not the same as agreement, I replied. Samuel exhaled slowly. She thinks the board will get tired of process. They might. He blinked. That doesn't worry you? No, I said evenly, because process only feels slow when someone's used to skipping it. He leaned against the doorframe, studying me. You've changed. I've stopped shrinking. That hung in the air between us. For years I thought staying small kept peace, kept friction low, kept Arya comfortable. What I didn't realize was that smallness breeds assumptions, and assumptions turn into erasure. By noon, an email circulated from Ellison, Special Board Review Governance Efficiency Assessment. There it was, clean phrasing, neutral tone, exactly how fear dresses itself when it wants to look rational. The meeting was scheduled for Friday, 3 days. Plenty of time to build a case. I didn't prepare a defense, I prepared data, audit timeline benchmarks, contract turnaround comparisons, pre- and post-reform, revenue stabilization graphs. It turns out transparency doesn't slow business, it clarifies it. By Thursday evening, I had a 22-page packet ready, not flashy, not argumentative, just measurable impact. When Friday arrived, the boardroom atmosphere was calm but cautious. Arya sat at the head again. Ellison opened the discussion. Concerns have been raised regarding agility under the new governance structure, he began. Arya folded her hands. We are facing increased market competition, she said evenly. Decision latency could cost us opportunities. No blame, no accusation, just implication. Ellison nodded. Carter, I slid the packets forward. Page 3, I said. They flipped. Contract approval time under prior structure averaged 11 business days, I continued. Post-reform average is 8. A few brows lifted. Page 7. Revenue retention chart. Investor attrition rate has decreased 4% since transparency measures were implemented. Silence. Page 12. Audit findings. No additional irregularities discovered. Financial stability confirmed. I closed my folder. Process hasn't slowed us, I said calmly. It's stabilized us. Arya watched me carefully. I could see it in her eyes. She hadn't expected numbers. She'd expected ideology. Ellison leaned back. These are strong metrics, he admitted. Another board member spoke up. I was skeptical at first, she said, but results are clear. Arya's posture shifted slightly, not defensive, recalculating. She cleared her throat. I'm not opposing governance, she said. I'm cautioning against complacency. That's fair, I replied. She looked at me sharply, surprised by the agreement. We can schedule quarterly efficiency reviews, I added, built into the structure. Ellison nodded. That seems reasonable. Vote taken. Unanimous to maintain reform with periodic review. No rollback, no dilution. The meeting adjourned. As the room emptied, Arya remained seated. You anticipated this, she said quietly. I anticipated data, I replied. She studied me for a long moment. You don't gloat. No, you don't celebrate. This isn't a game. Silence. Then she said something unexpected. You think I'm afraid? The honesty caught me off guard. I think you're adjusting, I said carefully. She held my gaze. I built this company when no one believed I could, she said quietly. I fought banks, investors, your grandfather's old partners. I made myself indispensable. I didn't interrupt. And now, she continued, I'm being told indispensability is dangerous. That's not what reform means, I said gently. It feels like it. There it was. Not anger, fear. Not of losing money, of losing identity. You're not irrelevant, I said. You're just not singular. Her eyes flickered. That might have been the most honest sentence I'd ever said to her. She stood slowly. I won't sabotage the structure, she said. I know. But don't mistake compliance for comfort. I won't. As she left, I realized something. The battle wasn't external anymore. It was psychological. and psychological shifts take longer than board votes. That evening, I drove home exhausted but steady. The house was quiet. I checked the mailbox out of habit, mostly bills and junk mail. But at the bottom, a thick envelope, no return address, cream paper, heavy. My name typed cleanly across the front, Carter Martin, not handwritten, not from the estate. I turned it over slowly, no postmark, which meant it hadn't been mailed, it had been placed. Inside the envelope, I could feel multiple sheets and something else, rigid, like a flash drive. I stood there for a long moment in the fading light. Reform had succeeded, governance held, fear acknowledged, so why was someone delivering new evidence to my front door? And more importantly, who knew where I lived well enough to leave it there quietly? Part 22. I didn't open the envelope right away. That might sound dramatic, but it wasn't. It was discipline. You don't tear into unknown variables at dusk on your front porch, not when the last few weeks have proven that timing is everything. I stepped inside, locked the door, and set the envelope on the kitchen counter. No return address, no postage, no handwriting, which meant whoever delivered it either knew my schedule or didn't care if I was home. I checked the security app on my phone, front camera feed, scrolling back to earlier in the afternoon. 3:12 p.m., a figure approached the mailbox, baseball cap, neutral jacket, head angled down just enough to obscure facial features. They slid something into the box, no lingering, no hesitation, gone in 12 seconds. I zoomed in. The angle was bad, but the gate, there was something familiar about it, not enough to accuse, enough to unsettle. I exhaled slowly and carried the envelope to my office. Desk lamp on, door closed, paper cutter, not fingers. Inside were 3 items. First, printed emails. Second, a USB flash drive. Third, a short typed note. You deserve to see this before the next board session. No signature. I sat down. The emails were between Arya and someone named D. Kessler. Subject lines, strategic exit scenarios and equity realignment. My pulse slowed. I scanned the first thread, dated 2 months ago, before the church incident, before Riverside exploded publicly. Arya had been exploring options to consolidate controlling shares, quietly, through private buyouts. The language was clinical. If minority stakeholder resistance increases, we pivot to dilution. Minority stakeholder. That was me. My stomach tightened. The second thread mentioned something else. Contingency if Henry's addendum surfaces. I stopped breathing for half a second. She'd known, or at least suspected. The note included a timestamp. Same week she authorized the Riverside override. Same week my name was removed. I leaned back slowly. This wasn't fear-driven adjustment. This was premeditated containment. I picked up the flash drive. For a moment, I considered not plugging it in. But justice through receipts doesn't work if you're afraid of evidence. I inserted it into my laptop. A single folder appeared. Audio. 3 files. I clicked the first. Arya's voice filled the room. If Carter activates the clause, we accelerate restructuring under Davis Urban before he stabilizes support. My throat tightened. Another voice responded, male, unfamiliar. And the shares? We neutralize influence before he realizes he has any. Neutralize, before I realize. The recording ended. I sat there, still. So this hadn't started with Riverside. Riverside had simply been leverage. The plan had been broader, preemptive. I clicked the second file. He doesn't have the appetite for confrontation, Arya was saying. He prefers isolation. Silence on the other end. We'll use that. The audio cut. I closed the laptop slowly. The room felt smaller. Not because I was surprised she strategized, but because she'd miscalculated something fundamental. She thought invisibility meant passivity. She never realized invisibility teaches observation. I stared at the printed emails again. 2 months ago. Before any public fracture. Before reform, she'd been planning share dilution, which meant the governance vote wasn't just about efficiency, it was about timing. If she consolidated enough control before reform solidified, she could legally override structural changes later. My phone buzzed. Samuel, did something get delivered to you today? My pulse ticked up. Why? A pause. Then, Mom asked if I'd seen you this afternoon. She seemed unsettled. Unsettled. That was new. I typed slowly. Why would she be unsettled? 3 dots. Then nothing. I looked back at the envelope. Someone wanted me to have this before the next board session, which meant someone inside her circle knew. Kessler? An assistant? Samuel? No. Samuel wouldn't play both sides like that. Would he? I replayed the security footage in my head. The gate, neutral jacket, baseball cap. I zoomed the clip again, frame by frame. At 3:12 p.m., the figure shifted slightly as they stepped away, and for half a second, their wrist was visible, a watch, metal band, distinctive. I'd seen it before. Samuel wore one exactly like that, but so did Ellison. Board chair. My stomach tightened. This wasn't just internal family maneuvering. This was board-level chess. If Ellison delivered this, why? Leverage, protection, insurance? Or was someone trying to fracture trust between me and Arya permanently? I leaned back in my chair. The recordings were real. The emails were real. But context matters. And timing matters more. The next board session was in 4 days. If I brought this forward publicly, it would end her leadership immediately. Not reform. Removal. If I didn't, she could continue consolidating quietly. Grandpa's letter echoed in my mind. Protect the company from desperation, even if it comes from someone you love. Was this desperation? My phone buzzed again. Samuel. She just asked for the share registry report. Full breakdown. There it was. She was checking positions, which meant she didn't know I'd seen this. Yet. I closed the laptop slowly. This wasn't about revenge. It was about trajectory. Expose her now, or wait and see how far she was willing to go. But as I stood and walked back toward the kitchen, something else caught my eye. The envelope. I picked it up again, and noticed something I'd missed before. In the bottom right corner, barely visible, an embossed mark. 3 small letters. HRM Henry Robert Martin. My grandfather's initials. I went still. This wasn't sabotage. It was succession insurance. He had anticipated this too, which meant someone he trusted had delivered it. And that meant the real question wasn't who left it. It was, what did he expect me to do with it? Part 23, I didn't sleep. Not because I was panicking, because I was thinking. There's a difference. The envelope sat on my desk like a quiet witness. Emails, audio files, my grandfather's initials embossed faintly into the corner like he'd known this moment would come. He probably had. He always said leadership isn't tested when things break. It's tested when you find out someone was willing to break them. At 6:30 a.m., I called Lucia. You knew, I said when she answered, a pause. Yes, not defensive, not surprised, you left it. No. Then who? I can't say. That irritated me. You can't or you won't? Both. Silence stretched between us. Henry didn't want you reacting from emotion, she continued gently. He wanted you reacting from alignment. Alignment with what? The company's future. I looked at the emails again. Share dilution, strategic exit scenarios, neutralize influence before he realizes he has any. She was planning to cut me out before Riverside, I said quietly. Yes. The confirmation didn't shock me. It settled something instead. So reform wasn't her idea. No. And the apology? Lucia hesitated. That was survival. There it was. Not remorse. Adaptation. Do you think she'll stop? I asked. I think she'll recalibrate. That was worse. Recalibration meant patience, and patient consolidation is harder to detect. I ended the call and drove to the office earlier than usual. The share registry report had already been pulled. Samuel was in the conference room reviewing it. She requested this last night, he said. I know. He looked tired. She's mapping voting control. Yes, he glanced at me. You're not worried. I'm informed. That almost made him laugh. What does that mean? It means I know exactly how much leverage I have. He frowned. You're not planning something extreme, are you? No. Which was true. Extreme is loud. Strategic is quiet. At noon, Arya requested a one-on-one meeting. No board. No Samuel. Just us. Her office door was closed when I arrived. She gestured for me to sit. I assume you're aware I reviewed the share distribution, she began. Yes. She folded her hands. You've acquired additional independent capital. Yes. You're building optionality. I'm building stability. Her eyes sharpened. That depends who you ask. Silence. Then she leaned forward slightly. Are you planning to invoke voting control? There it was. Direct. No, not yet. Her gaze lingered on my face. You've always underestimated how visible your restraint is, she said quietly. I almost smiled. And you've always underestimated how visible your preparation is. Her expression shifted, just slightly. What does that mean? She asked. I didn't answer directly. Instead, I said, are you planning further equity realignment? Her shoulders stiffened. That's confidential. So is derivative strategy. We held eye contact. Long, measured. She exhaled slowly. You've seen something. It wasn't a question. Yes. Silence. Then, how much? Enough. Her jaw tightened. Who gave it to you? Does it matter? It matters if my own board is undermining me. Or protecting the company, I replied. She stood and walked toward the window. For the first time, her posture wasn't composed, it was calculating in real time. You think I'm trying to remove you, she said. You were. She didn't deny it. I was protecting long-term control, she corrected, at my expense, at the company's continuity. That's not continuity, I said quietly. That's consolidation. She turned sharply. You've never had to make ruthless decisions. No, I replied. I've had to survive them. That landed. Silence settled heavily between us. You don't understand what happens when boards sense weakness, she said finally. They replace leadership. They replace instability, I corrected. And you don't think public fractures count as instability? I think secret dilution counts more. Her face went still. You have no proof, she said evenly. I didn't move. Check your March correspondence, I said calmly. Her breath paused. Tiny, but noticeable. You accessed private communication, she asked. No, that was true. I received it. Silence. Then something I hadn't expected happened. Her shoulders dropped. Not defeat. Recognition. Henry, she said softly. I didn't confirm. I didn't need to. She nodded slowly. He always had contingencies. Yes. She walked back to her desk and sat down. You could end this now, she said quietly. You could present it to the board. Yes. Why haven't you? Because this wasn't about humiliation. It was about trajectory. Because I don't want removal, I said. I want alignment. She studied me carefully. And if alignment isn't possible, then I protect the company. That was the line. The boundary. Not vengeance. Protection. She leaned back. You really believe that? Yes. Silence stretched. Then she said something that shifted everything. I was afraid, she admitted quietly. Not defensive, not sharp, just honest. I saw Henry preparing you, she continued, and I thought, when the time comes, he'll choose you. I didn't interrupt. And I built this, she said. I carried it through downturns, through lawsuits, through lenders who wouldn't even take my calls. I know, I said softly. You were invisible because I needed you safe, she said. That hit unexpectedly. Safe from what? I asked. Board politics, investor pressure, failure. I almost laughed. I wasn't safe, I said. I was erased. She closed her eyes briefly. That wasn't the intention. But it was the result. Silence. Then, what do you want, Carter? Not authority, not apology, not dominance. I want shared leadership without hidden exits, I said. She nodded slowly. And the emails? She asked. They stay with me. Insurance, accountability. She studied me one last time. You're not trying to destroy me. No, but you're not afraid to. That wasn't a question either. No, I said. We sat in silence. Two architects of different philosophies. Same foundation, different methods. Finally, she spoke. I will cease equity maneuvering, she said. Fully. No dilution strategies, no side entities. And I will not present the correspondence, I replied. A mutual containment. Fragile, but real. As I stood to leave, she added quietly, You're not invisible anymore. I paused at the door. I never was, I said. You just weren't looking. That night, I felt something I hadn't in years. Not victory, balance. But balance is delicate. And as I pulled into my driveway, headlights flashed briefly in my rearview mirror. A car slowed, then kept going. Maybe coincidence, maybe nothing. But when I checked the mailbox again, there was nothing inside, and somehow that unsettled me more. Part 24. The next week felt almost normal, which in our family is usually a warning sign. Audit updates came in clean. Riverside moved into final negotiation with Callahan. Investors sent cautiously optimistic notes. Even Aria seemed steadier, focused, composed, not maneuvering around corners. But equilibrium isn't the same thing as resolution. Wednesday afternoon, I received a calendar invite. Private strategy session. Ellison, Davis, Martin. No Samuel, just the three of us. I accepted. Ellison's office overlooked the river, floor-to-ceiling glass, minimalist decor, framed awards that subtly reminded you he'd outlasted 3 CEOs in his career. Aria was already there when I arrived. She didn't look tense. She looked prepared. Ellison gestured for us to sit. I'll be direct, he said. The company is stabilizing. Governance reform is functioning, but we need clarity on succession. There it was again, the word no one wanted to say out loud. Aria folded her hands. We're not discussing retirement, she said evenly. We're discussing contingency, Ellison corrected. He turned to me. Carter, your increased involvement and independent capital position you uniquely. That was polite phrasing for the board sees you as viable leadership. Aria didn't interrupt. Ellison continued. We need a formalized transition framework. I almost smiled. You mean the one Henry drafted? I asked. Ellison's brow lifted slightly. So you've seen it? Yes. Arya looked between us. You knew about that? She asked him. Ellison nodded. Henry briefed me privately years ago. Silence. The realization settled slowly. My grandfather hadn't just prepared me. He'd prepared the board. He didn't want conflict, Ellison said calmly. He wanted readiness. Arya's jaw tightened slightly. So this has been inevitable? She asked. Not inevitable, Ellison replied. Conditional. He turned to me again. Would you accept formal designation as successor effective upon board vote? The room felt suddenly smaller. I hadn't expected it this soon. I hadn't asked for it at all. Arya didn't look at me. She stared straight ahead. I took a slow breath. I would accept co-leadership long-term, I said. Not replacement. Ellison studied me carefully. That's unusual. I'm not interested in displacement, I replied. I'm interested in durability. Arya's eyes flickered. Ellison leaned back. Shared authority rarely lasts, he said. It can, I replied, if boundaries are clear. He considered that. What boundaries, he asked. Defined roles, transparent voting, no unilateral restructuring, succession triggered only by board consensus. Arya finally spoke. You'd tie your own advancement to consensus, she asked. Yes. She studied me for a long moment. That's risky. Control without consent is riskier. Silence. Ellison tapped his pen lightly against the table. You both realize this only works if there's genuine trust. Trust. The most fragile material in any structure. Arya exhaled slowly. I will not be maneuvered out, she said. You won't be, I replied. And you won't accumulate silent leverage, she added. I held her gaze. I won't use it. That was the closest either of us would come to referencing the stock certificates in my safe. Ellison nodded slowly. Then here's my proposal, he said. We formalize a dual CEO model for a 5-year term. Performance benchmarks built in. At the end of that term, the board reassesses. 5 years. Long enough to stabilize, short enough to remain accountable. Arya looked at me. It wasn't a challenge. It was a question. I nodded once. I agree. She held my gaze a second longer, then nodded too. Agreed. Ellison stood. I'll draft the resolution. As we walked out together, Arya was quiet. In the hallway, she stopped. You could have taken it, she said. What? Full succession. Yes. Why didn't you? Because this was never about dethroning her. It was about not being erased. I don't want to replace you, I said quietly. I want to work with you. She studied my face like she was searching for hidden motive, and for the first time, she didn't find one. You're not what I prepared for, she admitted. I know. We stood there in the quiet hallway. Not enemies, not allies. Something in between. That evening, Samuel showed up at my place with takeout. Mom told me, he said, handing me a container of noodles. Dual CEO. Yes. He shook his head slightly. I can't decide if that's brilliant or insane. Probably both, he laughed softly. You realize this changes our dynamic too. I'm aware. He looked at me seriously. I was raised to believe leadership meant being chosen. And now? I asked. He shrugged. Now it looks like being accountable. That surprised me. Maybe that's better, he added quietly. Maybe it was. After he left, I stepped outside to get some air. The night was cool, still. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was bracing for impact. But peace doesn't last long in families built on ambition. As I turned back toward the house, I noticed something at the edge of the driveway. Tire marks. Fresh. Stopping briefly, then turning around. Not random. Intentional. I walked closer. There, half hidden near the mailbox. A small object glinted under the porch light. I picked it up, a metallic cufflink, engraved with 3 letters. D.G. Davis Urban Group. The dissolved entity. I stared at it. We'd shut that down, legally, formally. So why? Was someone leaving reminders at my house? And more importantly, who wasn't finished yet? Part 25, I didn't tell Arya about the cufflink. Not immediately. I set it on my desk beside the envelope and the flash drive. Like a quiet collection of reminders that power doesn't disappear, it redirects. D.G. Davis Urban Group. The entity had been dissolved on paper, filings withdrawn, submissions rescinded. But paper dissolutions don't erase intention. The next morning, I asked our legal team for confirmation. Davis Urban Group was fully terminated. Our counsel said over speakerphone, articles of dissolution filed, bank account closed. Any residual contracts? I asked. None active. Any shell affiliations? A pause. Not that we've identified. Identified. That word carries a lot of weight. After the call, I drove to the warehouse district. The old DEG suite had been a temporary leased space, bare bones functional, I'd only seen it once during the forensic review. Now the windows were dark, lockbox empty, no signage, erased. But someone had kept the cufflink or had access to one. I pulled out my phone and called Samuel. "Did you ever order custom DUG accessories?" I asked. He blinked at me over FaceTime. "What? No. Cufflinks? No." "Who did?" He frowned. Mom didn't even like the name. "Who incorporated it?" "Outside counsel." "Which firm?" He told me. I made another call. The firm confirmed incorporation paperwork, but no merchandise orders, no branding collateral beyond digital assets, which meant the cufflink wasn't standard issue. It was custom, personal. I turned the object over in my palm. Heavy, not cheap. Someone had invested in the identity, which meant someone had believed it would last. That afternoon, I requested security footage from the night before. Street cameras, neighboring houses. At 9:47 p.m., a sedan slowed near my driveway, parked briefly. Driver door opened. A figure stepped out, same neutral jacket, same measured this time. The camera angle caught more. Not the face, but the build, taller than Samuel, broader shoulders, and on the wrist, no metal watch, leather band, different. My pulse slowed. This wasn't Samuel, this wasn't Ellison, and it probably wasn't Arya, which left one possibility. D. Kessler, the name from the emails. I called Lucia. "Who is Kessler?" I asked. Silence. Then Daniel Kessler, she said, consultant, former private equity. "What's his stake?" "Influence," she replied carefully. "He advised Arya during expansion years. Does he still?" "I don't believe so." Believe, another soft word. "He's the one who would benefit most from consolidation," she added quietly. Of course he would. Private equity doesn't like shared authority. It likes clean control. "Do you think he'd try to destabilize things?" I asked. "I think men like him don't invest in outcomes they can't predict." I looked down at the cufflink again. D a G, a failed vehicle. Unless someone still believed it could be revived. That evening, I finally told Arya. We met in my office after hours. I placed the cufflink on the table between us. She stared at it, then at me. "Where did you get this?" "Driveway." Her expression shifted. Not anger, not calculation. Concern. "I shut that down," she said quietly. "I know." She picked it up, turned it over. "I didn't authorize merchandise." "Who did?" She hesitated. "Kessler pushed branding early on. Of course he did." "When did you last speak to him?" I asked. "Before the board vote." "And after reform?" "No." I studied her carefully. "You're sure?" "Yes." Something in her tone felt different, not defensive, firm. She set the cufflink down. "He wanted aggressive restructuring," she admitted. I refused. "When?" "After Riverside collapsed." "That timeline mattered. You didn't mention that," I said. "You didn't ask." "Fair." Silence stretched. "Do you think he'd try to resurrect Deeg?" I asked. "He wouldn't resurrect it," she said. "He'd build something new." "With what leverage?" She met my eyes. Discontent. The word hung there. If he convinced enough minority shareholders that dual leadership was unstable, he could position himself as solution. Private equity thrives on fracture. "And the envelope?" I asked quietly. She looked up sharply. "What envelope?" I held her gaze. She wasn't faking confusion. "You didn't send it?" "No." That settled something, which meant someone aligned with my grandfather had, and someone aligned with Kessler was circling. Two silent players, different motives, same battlefield. Arya leaned back slowly. "He thinks you're idealistic," she said. "Who?" "Kessler." "And you?" She studied me for a moment. "I think you're deliberate." Not the same thing. We sat there in quiet understanding. For the first time, this wasn't adversarial. It was strategic alignment. "If he approaches you," she said, "he'll offer expansion capital. In exchange for what? Influence. And if he approaches you?" "He already has," she said quietly. My pulse ticked up. "When?" "Last week." "And?" I declined. I watched her carefully. "Why?" She didn't hesitate. "Because this company isn't for sale." There it was, the first time I'd heard that sentence from her without qualification. We were silent for a long moment. Then I said, "He left this as a message." "Yes." "What message?" "That he's still watching." That night, I moved the cufflink into the safe beside the shares and the letter. 3 layers, 3 contingencies, 3 silent forces. Reform had stabilized the company, but external pressure was building. And the next battle wouldn't be about family narrative. It would be about ownership, about whether shared leadership could survive external acquisition attempts. As I locked the safe, my phone buzzed. "Unknown number," I answered. "Carter Martin." A calm male voice responded. "Mr. Martin, Daniel Kessler, I believe it's time we spoke." Part 26, I didn't respond immediately. Silence is leverage. On the other end, the voice remained steady. I assume you received my calling card, he added. So it was him. You trespassed, I said calmly. I left a conversation starter. You could have called. I just did. Measured. Unhurried. Controlled. Public place? I said. Tomorrow. Noon. He didn't argue. Of course, he hung up first. The next day I arrived 10 minutes early. He was already there. The River House Grill Image private dining room, neutral lighting, no unnecessary witnesses. Daniel Kessler stood as I entered, tall, broad-shouldered, early 50s, the kind of posture that suggests he's never rushed for anything in his life. No metal watch, leather band, confirmed. We shook hands. His grip was firm, calculated, not dominant. Carter, he said, you've grown into the room. And you've been circling it, I replied, a faint smile. We sat. He didn't waste time. Dual CEO structures fail, he said plainly. Some do. Most. Most companies don't have our structure. They also don't have your fracture history, he countered smoothly. He poured water, didn't drink it. You're intelligent, he continued, strategic, principled. That last word was deliberate. But you're playing defense. I prefer stability. Stability is a temporary phase between consolidations. There it was, the worldview. Why are you really here, I asked. He leaned back slightly. Because this company will eventually choose a singular leader. When it does, external capital will determine who survives. External capital already tried, I said. We closed that door. He tilted his head. You closed Riverside. Not the same thing. You're building something, I said. Always. With Diug? That was Arya's experiment. But you invested in it. Advised, he corrected. I held his gaze. You left the cufflink. Yes. Why? To see who would respond. And if I hadn't, I would have approached the board. So this was a test. And what exactly are you offering? I asked. He folded his hands neatly. Protection. From market volatility, activist shareholders, opportunistic acquisitions, and in exchange, a minority position, structured debt instrument, board influence, not ownership, which meant control without visibility. No, I said simply. He didn't react. You didn't ask terms. I don't need to. A small pause. You're confident? I'm aligned. With Arya, he asked, probing. With the company. He studied me carefully now. Different tone, less charm. You believe she won't consolidate? He asked. I believe she won't sell. Belief is not governance. Neither is opportunism. That landed. He smiled faintly. You're more like Henry than she is. My pulse slowed deliberately. That's not a compliment coming from you. It should be. It isn't. He shifted slightly. Henry understood inevitability. Consolidation always comes. Not if ownership is unified. Is it? He asked quietly. There it was, the pressure point. He knew about minority dissatisfaction. He was counting on it. You underestimate what's changed, I said, and you overestimate how long alignment lasts. We sat in silence for a moment. Then he said calmly, when the board fractures, and it will, I'll be ready. That sounds like a threat. It's economics. He stood. So here's my courtesy. When the dual structure strains, call me before someone less polite does. He placed something on the table. Not a cufflink, a card, no logo, just a number. Then he left. No theatrics, no raised voice, just inevitability. That evening, I met Arya. I told her everything, no omissions. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back slowly. He's building a fund, she said. For us? For instability. Do you think he has enough capital? I asked. And he doesn't need majority, she replied. He needs momentum. Momentum attracts fear. Fear moves votes. I looked at her. Are you fully out from under him? A pause. Yes. Fully? Her eyes sharpened. Yes. I believed her, not because of trust, because of tone. There was no calculation left in it. He thinks we'll fracture, I said. We won't, she replied. You're certain? No, she admitted, but I'm willing. That was new. Willingness instead of control. Then we get ahead of it, I said. How? Preemptive alignment. She looked at me. Meaning, we call the board ourselves. Present 5-year strategy, transparent metrics, invite scrutiny. You want to force unity. I want to remove oxygen. Silence. Then she nodded slowly. That's bold. So is circling my driveway. A faint, reluctant smile touched her lips. All right, she said. We go first. 3 days later, we stood together before the board. Not opposite ends of the table, side by side. Ellison watched carefully, like Lucia took notes. Samuel sat unusually still. Arya spoke first, clear, direct, no defensiveness. Then I followed, structured, transparent, metrics defined. shared accountability, no secret consolidations, no silent debt instruments, no private equity dependencies. When we finished, the room was quiet. Ellison finally said, "This is the first time I've seen alignment without tension." "There's tension," Arya replied calmly. "We're just not weaponizing it." That mattered. Votes were cast. Unanimous support for the 5-year dual structure, formalized, documented, publicly announced, momentum neutralized, for now. That night, I received a text, unknown number. "You're accelerating faster than expected, no signature." But I didn't need one. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked to the safe again. The letter, the shares, the cufflink, 3 eras of leverage. Then my phone buzzed again. This time Samuel. "You home?" he asked. "Yes." "I think you should turn on the news." My stomach tightened. Why? A beat of silence, because Daniel Kessler just announced a new acquisition fund. I turned on the television. There he was. Press conference backdrop, new brand name, new entity. And behind him on the display screen, a familiar phrase, Urban Strategic Holdings. Not DUG, smarter, broader, publicly capitalized. And in the lower corner of the screen, a scrolling headline, Urban Strategic Holdings targeting undervalued infrastructure firms in transition. In transition. That wasn't subtle. The war wasn't inside the family anymore. It was outside. And this time, it would be public. Part 27. By morning, every financial outlet was running the same clip. Daniel Kessler at a podium, calm, measured, predictable. Behind him, the new logo, Urban Strategic Holdings. A cleaner name, broader mandate, harder to dismantle. He wasn't targeting us directly. He didn't need to. He was targeting undervalued infrastructure firms in leadership transition, which was almost poetic. I called an emergency session, not reactionary, preemptive. Ellison joined remotely. Lucia in person. Samuel sat beside me, unusually quiet. Arya entered last, composed, focused, no visible irritation. That alone told me she understood the scale. "He's building optionality," Lucia began. "Not a takeover, yet, a position." "How much capital?" I asked. Initial raise reported at $600 million. That was enough to start, not enough to finish, unless momentum built. Samuel leaned forward. "Can he accumulate shares quietly?" "Yes," Lucia replied, "through derivatives, strategic partnerships, affiliate funds." Arya folded her hands. "So we eliminate undervaluation." Everyone looked at her. She continued, "We accelerate performance disclosure, increase dividend visibility, tighten forecast guidance, control the narrative, starve the discount." I nodded. "And we speak publicly." Ellison's eyebrow lifted slightly. "Joint interview," I clarified, "visible alignment." Samuel exhaled softly. "You two in the same room on record?" "Yes." Arya didn't hesitate. "Schedule it." 3 days later, we sat across from a senior correspondent at Bloomberg Television. Image, bright lights, minimal room for missteps. The first question came quickly. "Urban Strategic Holdings has announced a transition-focused infrastructure fund. Do you view that as a threat?" Arya answered first. "No, not defensive, not dismissive, just calm. We view it as confirmation that our sector is attractive." The anchor turned to me. It's like, "Your company recently formalized a dual CEO structure. Critics argue shared leadership creates vulnerability." I met the camera. "Shared leadership creates accountability," I said evenly. "Vulnerability comes from opacity." A beat. "Are you concerned about activist positioning?" "No," Arya replied before I could, "because our performance metrics are transparent and ahead of schedule." That wasn't bravado. It was accurate. The segment ran 12 minutes, not one fracture. Not one contradiction. When it ended, the anchor smiled slightly. "You two seem unusually aligned." Arya glanced at me briefly. "We are." Markets responded. Stock up 4.2% by close. Not dramatic, but steady. Kessler's fund announcement cycle shortened. From confident interviews to neutral positioning, momentum dampened, but not erased. That night, Samuel came by again. He didn't bring takeout this time. He brought a laptop. "You need to see this," he said. He pulled up filings. Urban Strategic Holdings wasn't just raising capital. They were forming SPVs, special purpose vehicles, layered, discrete, target agnostic. "He's creating flexibility," Samuel said. "If one angle fails, another activates." I studied the structure. "He's patient," I said. "Yes. And he believes we'll eventually misstep." Samuel hesitated. "Will we?" I didn't answer immediately. Because dual leadership isn't tested in interviews. It's tested under stress. 2 weeks later, stress arrived, unexpectedly. Lucia called at 7:12 a.m. "We have a leak." "What kind?" "Internal forecast draft, pre-release numbers." "Accurate?" "Yes." "Public?" "Not yet." but circulating in private equity channels. Kessler didn't need to attack publicly, he just needed to create uncertainty. If analysts thought projections were inflated, volatility returns, discount returns, opportunity returns. I called Arya immediately. Her tone was steady. "We release early," she said. "Today? Yes." "That's aggressive." "So is shadow circulation." She was right. We convened legal, adjusted compliance timing, issued an early performance update, transparent, complete, no defensive tone, just facts. By noon, analyst chatter cooled. The leak lost oxygen, but someone inside had circulated it, which meant this wasn't just external pressure anymore. That evening, Arya came to my office without announcement. She closed the door behind her. "Do you trust the board fully?" she asked. "Yes." "Executives?" "Yes." "Middle management?" A pause. "No." She nodded once. "Neither do I." We stood there in the quiet. "Do you think Kessler has someone inside?" I asked. "I think he's investing in pressure points." "That's not an answer. It's the honest one." She walked toward the window. "For years," she said quietly, "I believe control prevented instability. And now? I think visibility does. That was growth, not strategy. Growth. We'll find the leak," I said. "Yes," she replied. Then she turned slightly toward me. "But Carter, yes? If this escalates beyond financial maneuvering, it won't," I said automatically. She held my gaze. "You don't know that." She was right. Private equity doesn't break laws, it bends structures, but pressure changes people, and people make mistakes. After she left, I stayed late, reviewing access logs, distribution lists, metadata. Near midnight, something caught my eye. The leaked file wasn't downloaded, it was screenshotted from inside a conference room presentation, which meant someone had photographed it, low-tech, harder to trace. I checked room booking history, one unscheduled access, after hours, 3 days ago, badge ID attached. I stared at the name, not executive, not board, operations analyst, junior Larkable, until now. I leaned back slowly, pressure point identified. But the question wasn't whether he'd been paid. The question was whether he knew who he was working for. My phone buzzed again, unknown number, different from before. I answered. Silence at first. Then, "You're moving efficiently, not Kessler." Different voice, older, calmer. "You're not Daniel," I said. "No." "Who is this?" A faint pause. "Someone who prefers the company remain intact." My pulse slowed. "Aligned with Henry?" I asked. A soft exhale. "You're asking the right questions." The line went dead. I stared at the dark screen. 2 external forces, one building pressure, one observing, and somewhere between them, us. For the first time, I understood something clearly. This wasn't just a financial contest. It was a test of endurance. And endurance doesn't break from impact, it breaks from sustained strain. The real question wasn't whether Kessler could acquire us, it was whether we could stay aligned long enough to make acquisition impossible. Part 28, I didn't report the second call, not yet. Information is leverage, and leverage used too early loses value. Instead, I focused on the analyst. Ryan Patel, 27, 2 years with the company, clean performance reviews, no red flags, on paper. In reality, he'd accessed a board-level projection deck after hours, unauthorized, low-tech capture, intentional. I asked Lucia to bring him in quietly, no security escort, no spectacle. He entered my office pale but composed. Arya sat to my right, not behind a desk, beside me, deliberate positioning. "Ryan," I said evenly, "we're missing context on an after-hours conference room access." His throat tightened. "I stayed late to review variance models." "That's not what we're discussing." Silence stretched. Arya spoke next. "Did someone ask you to take a photo?" Direct, not aggressive. He looked at her, then at me, then down. "Yes." There it was. "Who?" I asked calmly. He hesitated. He said he represented an investor. "Name." "Urban Strategic, not subtle." "Did he identify himself?" Arya asked. "No, just said they were evaluating infrastructure positions." "How did he contact you?" I asked. "LinkedIn, then encrypted app." Kessler didn't approach directly. He built deniability. "How much?" Arya asked. Ryan swallowed. 10,000. Cheap. Cheaper than I expected. "Did you send anything else?" I asked. "No." I watched him carefully. He believed that. Arya leaned forward slightly. "You understand this is prosecutable." His face drained. "I didn't think it was illegal, just early access." "That's what they rely on," she said quietly. "Ignorance as insulation." I leaned back. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "You'll provide full access to communications. We'll involve legal. If this is limited to what you've admitted, termination is likely. Prosecution depends on cooperation." His shoulders sagged. Yes, Lucia escorted him out. Door closed. Silence. Arya didn't look angry, she looked disappointed. He's not the architect, she said. No. He's bait. Yes. We both understood. Kessler wasn't trying to destabilize performance, he was testing perimeter strength. And now he had data, not damaging, but responsive. We'd acted quickly, which meant he'd recalibrate. By afternoon, legal confirmed something else. The encrypted app account linked back to a consulting intermediary. A name surfaced, not Daniel Kessler, but a former associate of his, and buried in older filings a quiet advisory role tied to Urban Strategic Holdings image layered distance, plausible deniability, expected. Samuel came by again that night. You're handling this calmly, he said. I don't see the benefit in reacting emotionally. He nodded. Mom would have scorched the earth 3 years ago. I know, he hesitated. She's not the same. I know. We stood in quiet acknowledgement of that truth. Growth isn't loud. It's visible in restraint. 2 days later, Kessler made his move. Not aggressive, strategic. Urban Strategic Holdings filed a passive 4.8% position in our stock, just under the 5% threshold requiring immediate detailed disclosure. Technically compliant, psychologically provocative. Ellison called within minutes. He's signaling, he said. I'm aware. Are you prepared for activist pressure? Yes. Confident? Yes. He paused. Good, because the market thinks this becomes a consolidation play within 18 months. 18 months. Longer than I expected, which meant Kessler was patient. That evening, Arya came to my house, unannounced. Again. No formality left in that boundary. He's in, she said. Yes. 4.8%. Yes. She stepped inside without waiting for invitation. We stood in my kitchen like something almost normal. He won't stay passive, she said. No. He'll wait for strain. Yes. She looked at me directly. Are we strong enough? It wasn't rhetorical. It was honest. I don't know, I said. She nodded slowly. That's the first uncertain answer you've given me. It's the only honest one. Silence. Then she said something unexpected. I received a call too. My pulse ticked once. From an older man, calm voice. I felt the air shift. What did he say? That Henry believed I would either evolve or fracture the company. I didn't speak. He said you were the contingency, not the successor. That reframed everything. Not replacement. Balance. What do you think he wants? I asked. I think, she said carefully, he wants proof that shared leadership isn't naive. That landed deeper than any market threat, because that wasn't financial, it was philosophical. 3 weeks later, strain arrived from somewhere we didn't anticipate. Not from Kessler, not from the board, from performance itself. A key municipal contract, one we'd forecast conservatively, was delayed due to regulatory review. Minor delay. 6 months. But markets don't process nuance, they process risk. Stock dipped 7% in a day. Urban Strategic didn't increase position, they didn't need to. Analyst chatter started the narrative for them. Dual leadership distraction. Transition uncertainty, capital vulnerability. The story writes itself if you let it. That night, Arya and I stayed late again. Empty boardroom, lights low. This is the strain, she said quietly. Yes. If we react defensively, he gains. Yes. If we overcorrect, we look unstable. Yes. She exhaled slowly. Then we don't react. I looked at her. We execute, she continued. We let performance speak. That takes time. So does acquisition. She wasn't wrong. Endurance. That was the test. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I answered, the same older voice. You're approaching the pivot point. Who are you? I asked calmly. A pause. Someone who believes the company should remain family-led. Aligned with Henry? Yes. Why call? To remind you of something he said. I waited. Control is temporary. Stewardship is tested. The line clicked off. I stood there in the quiet boardroom. Arya watched me. Same voice? She asked. Yes. What did he say? I met her eyes. That this is the test. She didn't look afraid. She looked resolute. Then we pass it, she said. Outside, markets fluctuated. Inside, pressure tightened. Kessler waited. The anonymous ally watched. Performance wavered. Alignment strained. And for the first time, I felt the weight not of succession, but of stewardship. Because winning wasn't defeating Kessler. It wasn't outmaneuvering private equity. It was proving that shared power could withstand sustained pressure. And that proof wouldn't come from speeches. It would come from what we did next. Part 29. The market doesn't panic all at once. It tests. Then it nudges. Then it watches who blinks. We didn't blink. The municipal delay stabilized within 48 hours. Analysts adjusted their notes. The 7% drop corrected halfway. But something more subtle happened. Urban Strategic Holdings filed an amendment. Their position increased, 5.3%. Now public, now visible, now intentional. Ellison called for a full board session. No remote attendance, in person. If this was going to turn into a pressure campaign, we needed to see each other's faces. The atmosphere was different this time, not fractured, but alert. Lucia projected the updated ownership breakdown. Urban Strategic Holdings, 5.3%. Minority institutional holders, steady. Family holdings, unchanged, which meant control was intact, for now. Ellison cleared his throat. Daniel Kessler has requested a meeting with the board. Of course he had. Formally? Arya asked. Yes. I leaned back slightly. He wants legitimacy, I said, or influence, Samuel added. Ellison looked at us carefully. He's proposing a strategic discussion, not an activist challenge. Not yet. Arya folded her hands. Then we accept. The room shifted slightly. You want him in this room? One director asked. Yes, she said calmly. If he intends to operate publicly, we address him publicly. I nodded once. Agreed. Fear feeds speculation. Visibility starves it. 2 weeks later, he walked into our boardroom. Not alone. 2 analysts, 1 legal advisor, controlled optics. He greeted each director by name. Prepared. He didn't look at me first. He looked at Arya. Impressive recovery, he said smoothly. Temporary volatility, she replied evenly. He smiled faintly. Then he began. Urban Strategic Holdings wasn't proposing acquisition. They were proposing strategic acceleration, capital infusion, targeted expansion into secondary infrastructure markets, debt leverage structured through their fund, board observer seat, not voting, just presence. It was elegantly framed. Lucia asked precise questions. Ellison asked structural ones. I waited. Finally, Arya turned to me. Your thoughts? The room quieted. Kessler's capital is disciplined, I said calmly, but it comes with directional influence. Influence toward growth, he countered. Growth at what cost, I asked. Scale. Speed. Consolidation. He didn't deny it. Directors shifted subtly. This was the pivot. He leaned forward slightly. You're strong now, he said, but infrastructure cycles tighten. Interest rates shift. Municipal budgets contract. When that happens, optionality disappears. He wasn't wrong. He was early. That's why we built cash reserves, Arya replied, and why we restructured procurement exposure, I added. He glanced at me. You're playing long, he said. Yes. And if long becomes too long, I held his gaze, then we adapt. Silence stretched. He smiled faintly. You're both more disciplined than anticipated. That wasn't praise. It was recalibration. After 90 minutes, the board recessed. Private executive session. Kessler and his team stepped out. The door closed. Ellison looked at us. He's persuasive. Yes, Arya said, and not wrong about cycles. No, I agreed. A director spoke carefully. Rejecting capital entirely could appear ideological. That was fair. Then we don't reject capital, I said. We reject dependency. The room went quiet. I continued. We open a minority issuance, broad market, dilute concentration risk, raise capital independently. Lucia's eyes sharpened. Preemptive, she said. Yes. Arya considered it. That would limit Urban Strategic's ability to increase stake without paying premium. Yes, and signal confidence. Yes. Ellison leaned back slowly. That's aggressive. So is circling a transition company, Arya replied. A long pause. Then a director nodded. I support exploring it. Another followed. Momentum, not reactionary, strategic, vote taken. Unanimous approval to explore independent capital raise. When Kessler re-entered, Ellison delivered it cleanly. We appreciate the proposal. At this time, the board has elected to pursue internal capital strategies. No apology, no hostility, just finality. Kessler absorbed it without visible irritation. I expected as much, he said calmly. Of course he did. He stood. We'll remain supportive shareholders. Supportive, not passive. He shook hands again. When he reached me, he paused half a second longer. You're accelerating, he said quietly. So are you, I replied. He left. That evening, Arya and I stood in the empty boardroom again. Same room, different atmosphere. We just escalated, she said. Yes. Are you certain? No. She nodded slowly. Good. I glanced at her. Good? If you were certain, I'd be worried. A faint smile, small but real. My phone buzzed, unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but I did. The older voice again. You chose independence. Yes. Henry would approve. Who are you? I asked again. A pause. Longer this time. Then, I was his partner before he retired. My pulse slowed. Name, Thomas Avery. The name hit. I knew it. Former co-founder. Quiet exit years ago. Minimal public presence. You've been watching? I asked. Yes. Why not step forward? Because stewardship isn't guided by ghosts, he said calmly. It's proven by those holding it. Silence. Is he aligned with you? I asked carefully. With the company, he replied. Then the line ended. I stood still for a moment. Arya watched me. Well, she asked. It's not just a shadow, I said quietly. It's history. Outside, markets prepared to open. Urban strategic adjusted models, analysts speculated the capital raise announcement would hit in 48 hours. This wasn't defense anymore. It was structural positioning. Kessler believed consolidation was inevitable. Henry believed stewardship required testing. Thomas Avery was watching. The board was aligned. But alignment under strain doesn't fracture loudly. It erodes quietly. And the real test wasn't whether we could block acquisition. It was whether we could survive what came next without turning on each other. Part 30. We announced the independent capital raise before markets opened. No theatrics, no defensive tone, just structure. Minority issuance, broad institutional allocation, no preferred side agreements, no single investor exceeding 2%. Clear, disciplined, deliberate. The market reaction was immediate, up 3% pre-market. Analysts framed it as confidence. Urban Strategic's stake diluted to 4.6% by close. Not dramatic, but symbolic. Kessler hadn't lost, but he'd been contained. That afternoon, I received a formal request. Urban Strategic was nominating a board observer under standard minority rights thresholds. Non-voting. Informational access only. Legal. Expected. I walked into Arya's office without knocking. They're requesting observer status, I said. She didn't look surprised. They're entitled. Yes. They're comfortable with that? No, she replied evenly, but comfort isn't governance. Fair. Transparency cuts both ways. If we denied access, we'd look defensive. If we granted it, he gained visibility. But visibility wasn't the same as control, and we were betting on endurance. 2 weeks later, Urban Strategic's designated observer took a seat at the far end of the boardroom. Not Kessler, a younger partner, quiet, watchful, laptop closed, just listening. Pressure had shifted. It wasn't hostile, it was persistent, like background noise that never quite fades. The real strain didn't come from the boardroom, it came from inside. Dual leadership sounds balanced in theory. In practice, it requires constant calibration. 3 months into the capital raise, an expansion opportunity surfaced. Secondary infrastructure portfolio in the Midwest, high upside, moderate risk, speed required. Arya leaned toward aggressive entry. I leaned toward phased integration, not opposition. Difference in tempo. In private, we debated it, not emotionally, but intensely. If we hesitate, another fund takes it, she said. If we overextend, we validate Kessler's narrative, I replied. He already has a narrative. Yes, and we don't feed it. Silence. Neither of us raised our voices. That wasn't the danger. The danger was subtle erosion, different instincts under pressure. Finally, she said, you think I default to expansion? Yes. And you default to preservation? Yes. We held each other's gaze. That was the fracture line. Not personal. Philosophical. Growth versus durability. Neither wrong. Both necessary. The question was balance. She exhaled slowly. Then we test it, she said. Test what? Shared authority. We brought the proposal to the board transparently. Both positions presented, no unified front this time, just structured disagreement. Ellison listened carefully. Lucia ran scenario modeling. Directors debated openly, and something unexpected happened. Instead of dividing, the board synthesized. Phased entry with conditional acceleration triggers. Arya got forward motion, I got risk containment. Decision passed unanimously. After the meeting, Arya lingered. That's new, she said quietly. What is? I didn't feel undermined. You weren't. I know. That mattered more than the vote. Urban Strategic's observer took notes the entire time. No reaction. But later that evening, Kessler called, not from an unknown number this time. Direct line. You're allowing visible disagreement, he said. Yes. That weakens optics. It strengthens governance. A small pause. You're gambling on maturity. No, I said calmly. We're practicing it. He didn't respond immediately. Then, most partnerships collapse under prolonged asymmetry. Then it's fortunate we're not asymmetrical. A faint exhale. You're harder to destabilize than projected. That sounds like a compliment. It's analysis. He hung up. Months passed. No dramatic takeover attempts, no hostile filings, just incremental positioning. Urban Strategic maintained stake, Didn't increase, didn't retreat, watching, waiting. The Midwest expansion performed above conservative forecast, not explosive, sustainable. Market confidence solidified, volatility decreased, and something subtle shifted inside the company. Executives stopped triangulating between us. They stopped guessing which side to align with, because there weren't sides. There was process. Samuel noticed it first. At a quarterly dinner, he leaned back and said, "I don't feel like I'm choosing between you anymore." "You never were," Arya replied calmly. He smiled slightly. "I know that now." 1 year after Kessler's fund launch, Urban Strategic's position dropped, not through confrontation, through opportunity cost. They redeployed capital elsewhere. Higher volatility target, faster returns. We weren't unstable enough, not undervalued enough, not fracturing enough. And private equity doesn't wait forever. They rotate, quietly, methodically. Ellison confirmed it in a brief call. They've reduced to 2.1%. Still present, I said. Yes, but no longer strategic. I hung up and walked to Arya's office. "They're scaling down," I said. She nodded slowly. "I expected that." "No celebration?" She shook her head. "This wasn't about defeating him." "No, it was about not becoming what he predicted." That landed. Because she was right. This was never about Kessler. It was about whether power could be shared without implosion, whether legacy could evolve without displacement. That evening, I received one final call from the older voice, Thomas Avery. "You've reached equilibrium," he said, "for now. That's all stewardship ever is." A pause. "Henry believed conflict was inevitable," he continued. "He hoped alignment was possible." "And now?" I asked. "Now I believe he was right to prepare both of you." The line didn't click off immediately. There was a quiet breath on the other end. "Then you've done enough." The call ended. 2 years later, the dual CEO structure remained intact. Not perfect, not seamless, but functional, transparent, resilient. The market had stopped questioning it. The board no longer framed it as temporary. It was simply governance. One evening, Arya and I stood in the boardroom again. Same room where tension once lived. 5 years seemed ambitious, she said. It still does. She glanced at me. "You never tried to replace me." "No." "Why?" I considered the question carefully. "Because replacing you would have repeated the pattern." She nodded slowly, and sharing it changed it. Silence settled between us. Not heavy, not fragile, just steady. Outside, the company moved forward. Not explosive, not collapsing, growing, measured, enduring. Kessler had believed consolidation was inevitable. Henry believed contingency was necessary. Thomas Avery believed stewardship was tested. What I learned was that power isn't proven by how tightly you hold it. It's proven by whether it survives being shared. And in the end, that was the only succession that mattered.